Hi there. Tonight, we step into the muddy, torchlit lanes of a medieval village. You're a young woman who's just done the unthinkable, refused to marry. Picture yourself standing beside the village well. The air is sharp with the scent of damp earth and blooming hawthorn. Your rough wool dress is patched at the knees, and the bucket in your hands feels heavier than usual. Not from water, but from the weight of whispers swirling around you. You said no to the miller's son, the match your family swore would secure their future. Now the village is buzzing like a kicked hive. Spoiler alert. You probably won't get through this without some serious side-eye and a few sharp words from your neighbors. Before we settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy this kind of storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I'd love to know where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft in the background, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the heart of the village, surrounded by crooked cottages and muddy paths carved by wagon wheels. The late spring sun struggles to pierce the morning mist. The well's pulley creaks as you haul up water, but it's not the sound of wood and rope that fills the air. It's the murmurs of your neighbors. She turned him down flat, hisses one woman, her basket of turnips forgotten. Another scoffs. What does she think she's worth, a queen? You keep your eyes fixed on the bucket, pretending not to hear, but their words sting like nettles. Refusing marriage isn't just a personal choice, it's rebellion. And in this world, rebellion has consequences. In medieval Europe, marriage was a cornerstone of order. By the 13th century, the church had declared it a holy sacrament, binding families, land, and labor into one fragile web. For someone like you, saying no was more than defiance. It was a threat to that fragile balance. Some villagers even believed that unmarried women brought bad luck, like storm clouds over crops. So as you dodge glares on your way home, you might as well be carrying a curse instead of a water bucket. You hoist the bucket and trudge back toward your family's cottage. Your hands are rough from spinning wool. Your back sore from chopping firewood. You're barely 17, yet the whole village acts as though you committed treason. Inside, your home is crowded. Parents, a younger brother, and a goat that's currently chewing through your best straw mat. Privacy is non-existent, and your refusal is now the talk of every hearth. You overhear mutters about stubborn lasses and bite back a reply. The truth is, you didn't refuse the miller's son out of pride. You just couldn't imagine a lifetime tied to his drunken rants. A detail the gossip skips, of course. You're tired. You've been up since dawn, milking cows and dodging your mother's lectures about securing your future. The village expects you to be a dutiful daughter, a blushing bride. But right now you're neither. You smirk, thinking that maybe in another century people might actually celebrate your independence. But here, it's a scandal. If saying no were a crime, you'd be the village's most wanted. When you push open the cottage door, smoky air greets you. Your parents are already mid-discussion. Well, more like mid-fury. They've spent weeks negotiating with the miller's family, and your refusal just threw all of that into chaos. Your mother stirs a pot of thin porridge, her face tight with worry. Your father's outside, probably cursing your name to the chickens. The villagers' whispers will reach them soon, if they haven't already. You set the bucket down, water sloshing over the dirt floor, and try to ignore the knot tightening in your stomach. Refusing marriage feels like freedom, but it's a heavy kind, one that could cost you everything. Inside, the air is thick with smoke and tension. Morning light seeps through cracks and shutters, casting thin lines across the dirt floor where the goat chews lazily. Your mother stirring the porridge with vengeance, her lips pressed tight, while your father stomps in from outside, face red as the embers. They're about to unleash a storm of pleading and scolding, and you brace yourself. Your hands are still damp from the well, your wool dress itching against your skin. In this world, marriage isn't about love, it's survival. By the 13th century, families treated it as a transaction, a lifeline that could secure land, labor, and status. Your refusal threatens all three. For peasants like your family, a daughter's marriage might bring a dowry of land or livestock. Sometimes even a small gift like a carved comb or a sack of barley to sweeten the deal. Your mother waves a wooden spoon as she lectures you. hinting that maybe that spoon itself was part of the bargain. Historians still debate whether such gifts were bribes or symbols of unity, but judging by your mother's expression, it's definitely the former. You stand by the hearth, pretending to rearrange the firewood as she slams the spoon down. "You'll ruin us, girl," she snaps. And she's not wrong. That little strip of land tied to your marriage deal is your family's future. Without it, winter will be lean. Your father joins in, his booming voice echoing through the small cottage, words like duty, family, and shame cutting deeper than any insult from the villagers. You think back to the whispers at the well and realize those were nothing compared to this. Your parents aren't just angry, they're afraid. And you're the reason why. If saying no is a sin, you're about to get a sermon from Saint Dad himself. You clutch the edge of your dress, trying to explain that the miller's son isn't the kind of man you can trust, his temper, his drinking, his cruel words. But your protests sound weak against their desperation. Your mother's voice softens, trembling as she pleads, "You'll have a home, security." You want to shout that security should mean a lifetime of fear, but the words stay trapped in your throat. Your little brother watches in the doorway, too young to understand but old enough to feel the tension choking the air. The cottage feels smaller now, closing in around you. Your father mutters about losing the miller's goodwill, about land slipping through his fingers. You've seen what happens when a family falls out of favor. Poverty, scorn, isolation. You think of the neighbor's daughter who refused a match last year, and now sells turnips no one buys. Your mother clutches the wooden spoon, and for a moment you wonder if it's meant to shame you or tempt you. If that spoon's a bribe, you'd trade it in for a ticket out of here. But there's no escape. Not when every eye in the village is watching, waiting for you to bend. Your mother's voice rises again, listing every horror of unmarried life, poverty, loneliness, disgrace. You know she means well, but her words feel like chains. You also know that marrying the miller's son would be a different kind of prison. If marriage is a cage, your family is begging you to lock yourself inside it. So for now, you nod pretending to listen. Then you slip outside, where the morning air is cool and sharp, the sound of clucking hens filling the silence. The weight of your parents' pleas lingers in your chest like smoke as you trudge toward the church, summoned by the priest's stern message. The village hums around you, watching, whispering, waiting to see what you'll do next. Your refusal to marry the miller's son has stirred more than idle gossip. Word has spread beyond the whispers of the village, and now the church, unyielding and ever watchful, has taken notice. The stone chapel looms ahead, its bell tolling low and heavy, as if warning you of what's to come. You brace yourself for a lecture that will make your father's anger seem mild in comparison. Your heart pounds against your ribs, the dirt path rough beneath your worn shoes, as you prepare for priest's talk of duty, sin, and obedience. In medieval Europe, marriage was not simply a personal choice. It was a divine obligation. By the 13th century, the Catholic Church had declared a sacrament, binding not just hearts but souls. Refusing marriage was seen as defiance against family, community, and God himself. For a peasant woman like you, rejecting a match could invite the wrath of both priest and parish. Some priests, it said, sprinkled holy salt on defiant women, believing it could drive out rebellious spirits. You hope your priest will skip that ritual, though the deep frown on his face doesn't promise mercy. Historians still debate whether such practices were symbolic gestures or calculated shaming, but as you step into the chapel's cool shadow, you feel shame thicken the air. The heavy wooden door groans as you push it open. Inside, incense mingles with mildew, and the chill of the stone floor seeps through your soles. The priest, thin, sharp, and gray-eyed, stands at the altar like a sentinel of judgment. He clutches his prayer book like a weapon, his gaze piercing enough to curdle milk. You drop your eyes, the wool of your dress suddenly prickling worse than ever. You defy God's will, he begins, his voice low but cutting. You flinch. He isn't here to talk. He's here to command. Marriage, he reminds you, is a sacred duty, a path to salvation through service and submission. You think of your parents' cottage, their eager faces when the miller's son proposed. The church, you realize, stands firmly on their side. The priest begins to pace, his robes brushing the floor, and launches into a sermon about Eve's sin and the ruin brought by disobedient women. You're tempted to roll your eyes. If Eve is the problem, you like a word with Adam, but you stay still. Defiance here could lead to far worse than gossip. He warns that rejecting marriage endangers not just your soul, but your family's honor and the peace of the village. The miller's son, despite his drunken temper, is in his eyes your divinely chosen match. Saying no is spitting in the face of holy order. Your fists clench. Above the altar, the iron cross gleams like a judge's gavel, and you can't help but wonder how God could make such a poor choice. The priest's words grow louder, quoting scripture about fruitful wombs and obedient wives. You can feel the weight of every village eye, every whispered judgment echoing from these cold walls. You think of other women who dared to refuse. One, a neighbor's daughter, was dragged before a church court for disobedience. Not your fate, yet, but the threat feels real. Some priests, you've heard, even kept sin lists, recording names of women to watch. If you're on his list, you joke to yourself, you'd better hope for a spelling error. The priest finally softens his tone, urging you to pray for wisdom, to accept your God-given path and the miller's son. He presses a candle into your hand, a gesture of mercy, though it feels more like a leash. You take it, the wax cool and smooth, and promise to think on his words. As you step back into the sunlight, the chapel bell tolls again. The village seems smaller now, its paths narrower, the air tighter. You can almost hear the priest's voice still chasing you down the road. If this is God's plan, you think grimly, perhaps heaven needs a rewrite. The path home is muddy under your shoes, and the candle feels heavier with every step. The miller's son remains the talk of the village, his name always paired with yours in hushed tones. Your appearance pleas echo alongside the priest's warnings, and the future looms uncertain. Spinsterhood, unmarried life, is not freedom but another kind of cage. In your world, unmarried women stand on shaky ground. By the 14th century, those who never wed often faced isolation and poverty. Marriage was the surest road to respect, security, and survival. Some villagers gave spinsters kinder names, calling them hearthkeepers, women who stayed home to tend family fires. But pity always laced a title. Historians still argue whether unmarried life offered rare independence or merely a slower kind of exile. As you reach your cottage and push open the door, it feels like the latter. Smoke from the hearth fills the air. Your mother stirs porridge, her glance sharp but weary. Outside, your father chops with angry rhythm, while your brothers keep their distance from the storm inside. You set the priest's candle on the wobbly table, its wax already softening in the heat. What did the priest say? Your mother asks, voice tight. You mumble something about prayer and duty, skipping the part about eternal damnation. The truth sits heavy in your chest. You face a life without protection, without property, without place. The villagers' whispers will stick like burrs, proud, disobedient, cursed. You picture the years ahead, bound to this cottage, helping until your parents pass, then surviving on your brother's pity. The spinning wheel, the wash bucket, the endless chores, these will be your companions. You've seen other women like you. Old Maud, hunched and silent, her fingers knotted from weaving, her eyes never meeting anyone's at market. She is your future, and the thought makes you shiver. If spinsterhood wears a crown, it's made of thorns and cold porridge. You take the bowl your mother offers, the meal thin and gray, and eat mechanically. The church calls marriage salvation, but this feels like exile, slow and quiet. You will have no children, no dowry, no legacy, just your name, fading in a village that prefers its women obedient and married. You glance at the unlit candle. Its flame might have been meant for prayer, but now it feels like a challenge. Outside, a neighbor's voice drifts in, that stubborn lass again, and the words land like stones. You rise, brushing crumbs from your dress, and step into the daylight. The village spreads before you, thatched roofs shining in the sun, but every glance feels colder now. Every path feels narrower. And still, despite it all, you walk on. You think about the miller's son, his leering grin, his heavy hands, and you know deep down you'd rather face loneliness than his fists. The choice feels bitter, but clear. Surviving as a spinster will take work, wit, and a hide thick enough to weather stares and scorn. You're not sure you have any of those things yet. Still, you joke to yourself. If spinsterhood's a battle, you're armed with nothing but a wooden spoon and sheer stubbornness. Off in the distance, Maud's crooked hut leans against the horizon, its roof sagging like a warning. You take a breath and head toward the well. The village's whispers follow you like shadows. The creaky pulley groans as you haul up another bucket, the rope rough against your palms. Cold water splashes against your wool dress, soaking the same patch hem you've mended a dozen times. You can almost hear the priest's voice again, his talk of duty, your parents' pleas, their fears that you'll waste away in solitude. The morning sun climbs higher, burning off the mist, but the air feels heavier with every stare that follows you. Your refusal to marry the miller's son has turned you into the village spectacle, a living cautionary tale. You can feel the web of gossip closing in. The rope bites into your hands as you grip it tighter, bracing for the scorn that always comes next. In medieval Europe, survival depended on belonging. By the 14th century, small villages like yours ran on cooperation. Shared fields, shared feasts, and marriages that tied families together. To reject a marriage wasn't just rebellion. It was disruption. It marked you as an outsider, a break in a chain that kept everyone afloat. Some villages, they say, even held shaming parades for women who refused matches, bells, chants, children mocking from the road. You pray yours never starts such a tradition, though the glares that pierce you now feel like their own silent procession. A group of women approaches, baskets full of leeks and eggs. Their chatter fades as they spot you. Still too good for Miller's boy? One sneers, loud enough for all to hear. You keep your face blank, but your cheeks burn. If scorn were a soup, you think, they're serving it by the ladle today. You remember the priest's sermon on duty and realize the truth. The village is his enforcer. Their judgment is the whip he left behind. Another woman, older and leathery-faced, mutters something about cursed spinsters ruining the harvest. You want to snap that your no didn't blight their barley, but you hold your tongue. Instead, you lift a bucket, water sloshing, and start toward home. Their eyes bore into your back. Around you, life continues, men hauling carts, children chasing a stray dog, but you feel invisible. Refusing marriage isn't just a personal choice anymore. It's a brand. You've seen how it plays out. Maud again, shuffling through the market with her head down, her name used as a warning to young girls. Don't end up like her, your mother once said. And now, here you are, her heir apparent. The whispers at the well aren't just talk. They're walls closing in. As you near the cottage, the bucket heavy in your hands, you realize the village's scorn has layers. It isn't just judgment, it's practicality. Without a husband, you're a burden. You own no land, have no dowry, no heirs to work the fields. A man outside the alehouse laughs about wasted wombs, and you grit your teeth, tempted to throw the whole bucket over his head. If judgment were a trade, you think, this village could form a guild. Your parents' fear and the priest's threats echo in your mind. The village's rejection isn't random. It's a weapon. Every whisper, every glare, pushing you toward the miller's son or into oblivion. Ahead, a neighbor's daughter, your age, passes by with her betrothed. Her eyes dart away, her pity stinging worse than scorn. The tide of judgment is strong, and you're swimming against it alone. You think of Maud again, her silence at market, her eyes fixed on the ground. Will you become like her, toughened, bitter, or will you break first? If spinsterhood's a club, you think Riley, the entry fee is every stair in this village. You trudge on, the bucket swinging by your side, a mirror of their disdain. The judgment will cling to you now, like a second skin you can't shed. You think of the women by the well, their sneers about cursed spinsters, and imagine trading their stares for a cloister's quiet. In the distance, the church stands tall, its stone walls linked to the nearby convent. A day's walk away. You've heard of its Sisters of St. Clair, austere but kind, or so the traveling peddler claimed. Still, kindness always comes with a price. Leaning against the doorframe, the wood rough beneath your palm, you picture the convent. Stone walls, plain habits, endless prayers. It's not freedom, but it's not the miller's son's fists either. You'd escape gossip, exhaustion, and your father's disappointed sighs. Yet convents weren't for every girl. Piety had to be proven, and your family's meager barley couldn't stretch to a dowry, however small. You think of old Maud, the spinster scraping by, and wonder if the nunnery's walls might protect you from her fate. If convents are freedom, you think Riley, they're the kind that come with curfew and a prayer book. Outside, your father's voice breaks the air, shouting at your brother to stack the firewood properly. He hasn't mentioned the convent or marriage, but your mother's quiet hope lingers in your mind. The priest, too, might push you toward the nunnery, though he'd likely frame it as penance, not mercy. Even as a nun, you wouldn't escape judgment. You've heard stories of wayward novices, girls who fled the cloister for love or madness. If saints had a beginner's guide to holiness, you think you'd be first in line. You step back inside, the cottage smoke curling around you, and pick up the spindle again. The convent's narrow door demands vows of chastity and obedience, but it's still a door, unlike the village's closing gates. Better to face a cloister's rules than the miller's cruelty. Yet even the nunnery isn't a sure refuge. Poverty and the church's scrutiny both stand in your way. If the convent's a haven, you'll have to pack light and pray hard. For now, you spin the wool. The rhythm of your mother's loom a reminder of the work that never ends. The promise of the nunnery hangs in your thoughts like a fragile thread, one that might lead you out or tie you tighter. You're still by the hearth, the spindle twirling in your hands. The half-spun will a testament to uncertainty. The dress itches. Your fingers ache. On the table, the priest's candle glints in the morning light. The villager's judgment, your parents' worries, and the looming specter of spinsterhood all press into the sound of the church bell drifts through the air. You think of what convent life truly means. The vows, the rules, the cloistered walls, trading one kind of confinement for another. In 13th century Europe, convents like those of the Poor Clares or the Benedictines demanded vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. For someone like you, that meant surrendering what little freedom you had in exchange for prayer, labor, and obedience under the watchful eye of an abbess. You smile faintly at the thought that some convents required novices to bring a prayer stool, a small bench carved with saints for kneeling through long hours of worship. You glance at your own wobbly stool and doubt it would pass muster. Historians might argue whether convents gave women agency or simply replaced marital control with religious authority, but as you spin, the idea of change feels all too real. Your mother's still at the loom, her rhythm steady, her silence full of things unsaid. She'd spoken the convent as hope, not warning. But you've heard other stories from peddlers, from whispers, about nuns rising before dawn to chant Latin psalms, scrubbing floors, fasting more than feasting. The Sisters of St. Clare are known for their austerity, surviving on alms and coarse bread. You stir the fire, the embers flaring weakly. The convent's walls promise silence, but also erasure. You'd trade your wool dress for a habit, your name for a sister, your dreams for devotion. You're not a rebel, but the thought of surrendering your will to another's makes you bristle. Still, between the miller's violence and the nun's vows, the choice feels clear. Yet even this fragile escape has its price. Your family can't afford the dowry, and the priest would demand proof of your faith. The spindle spins, the wool gathers, and as the church bell tolls again, you realize that the life you know and the one you imagine both bind you, just in different ways. If convents are looking for saints, you're more like a saint in training. The air inside the cottage is thick, smoke curling lazily around you as you sit and think. You picture the nunnery's cold stone walls, solid, unmoving, cutting you off from the familiar bustle of the village. You've seen nuns before at the market, their eyes downcast, always escorted by a stern sister. They don't gossip, they don't marry, and they don't starve. But they don't really live either, not the way you know life. You think of old Maud, the spinster scraping by, and realize the convent might save you from her hunger, but not from her loneliness. The church warns that a spinster's solitude is a sin, yet the convent's vows come with their own kind of leash. If the nunnery is freedom, it's the kind where you're free to pray and scrub, nothing more. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight grounding you. The convent's door might be open, but it's a narrow one, its vows as binding as iron. You think of your mother's quiet hint, of the priest's unlit candle, and wonder, do they see the nunnery as salvation, or simply a way to tuck you out of sight? Behind those cloister walls, the villagers' whispers would fade, but so would the sunlight, the goat's silly bleating, and your brother's teasing laughter. You spin the wool tighter, bracing yourself for the choice that looms ahead. If the convent is a path, it's one paved with prayers and no shortcuts. For now, you just keep spinning. The loom's steady clack reminds you of the world you might soon leave behind. You're still in the cottage, the spindle idle in your lap. The half-spun will slip through your fingers as you stare into the faint embers. Smoke coils around you, and your damp wool dress clings uncomfortably to your skin. The thought of the convent's strict vows, chastity, obedience, endless prayer, hangs in the air like fog. The priest's candle on the table catches the morning light, a silent reminder of the church's reach. While your mother's loom clacks on, her eyes flicking toward you with unspoken worry. The villagers' scorn, your parents' pleading, and the bleak future of poverty have driven you to consider the nunnery. But as the village outside stirs to life, you find yourself thinking of something else entirely. Another kind of life whispered about by a traveling weaver last summer. Begin communities. That's what he called them. Groups of women living neither as wives nor as nuns. The idea glimmers in your mind now, strange and bright. In medieval Europe, Beguines were laywomen who lived together in simple communal houses, especially in the Low Countries and parts of Germany. By the 13th century, they had chosen work and devotion over both marriage and cloister life, living piously but without formal vows. For a peasant like you, a Beguine life would mean joining other women to spin, weave, or tend the sick, pooling your meager resources to survive, outside the church's rigid control. A curious detail you recall. Beguines often wore gray mantles, plain cloaks that marked their status. Not as binding as a nun's habit, but enough to fend off gossip. You picture one draped over your patched dress, softening the sneers at the well. Historians argue even now, were Beguines early feminists or just clever survivors? Either way, their independence calls to you like a faint song. You set the spindle down, stretch your sore back, and step into the cool air outside. The morning smells of wood smoke and spring earth. The weaver stories come back to you. Women who prayed but laughed too, who worked but kept their own earnings. They lived free of husbands, of abbesses, of anyone else's control. They're said to be a Beguine house a few towns away, near a market where women tend the sick and sell cloth. You imagine it. Shared hearths, no vows, a life you could shape yourself. The convent's fasting and cold stone walls seem far away compared to that warmth. But there's a problem of distance and of money. You'd need coin or courage to get there. Leaning against the doorframe, the splinter would rough under your palm. You picture the Beguine house. Wooden benches, a communal loom, women chatting over steaming soup. It's not luxury, but it's not old Mord's crumbling hut either. You'd still spin wool like now, but sell it with your own hands. Maybe even learn to dye or sew fine linens. The church tolerates Beguines only reluctantly. Too holy for wives, too free for nuns. You think of the miller's son again, his drunken grin, and you know you'd rather face a Beguine's hard work than his cruelty. If Beguines are rebels, then you're ready to join their sewing circle. Smoke stings your eyes as you step back inside. Your mother's loom still clacks, steady and patient. She hasn't spoken of convents or Beguines or marriage. That world of choices belongs to you now. The trouble is getting there. Beguines don't ask for dowries, but you'd still need a patron or a skill worth their trust. Your spinning is decent, but not yet fine enough to sell. And your family's barley stores won't fund a journey. You think of the priest's sermons about God's plan and wonder what he'd say about these women. Would he bless them or burn them? Rumors say Beguine houses are watched. Their books search for heresy. If Beguines are free, it's the kind of freedom with a bishop watching over your shoulder. You sit again, picking up the spindle, its weight suddenly heavier. The Beguine path tempts you. Work, community, no miller's son. But it's uncertain. You be leaving behind your family, your home, the goats bleating for something unknown. Yet between the convent's cage and the village's scorn, the Beguines offer a middle road. If you can reach it, the scorn might fade, but new challenges would take its place. Suspicion, labor, survival. If the Beguines are a haven, it's one you'll have to weave yourself. For now, you spin the wool, the loom's rhythm like a heartbeat, holding on to the dream of that gray-mantled life like a fragile thread. You're still by the cottage door, spindle in hand, the half-spun yarn twisting unevenly. Behind you, the hearth crackles faintly. The priest's candle glints, a silent judge, and your wool dress itches under the growing warmth. The thought of Beguine community shimmers like a mirage. Shared hearths, quiet prayers, laughter, and work that's your own. A way to escape both the miller's son and the convent's walls. Yet as the village's sounds drift in, cartwheels rumbling, voices rising, you can't ignore the risk. Freedom comes with its own price. In medieval Europe, Beguines lived on the edge of society. By the 13th century, their independence, women living without vows or male control, earned both admiration and suspicion. They worked as weavers, nurses, teachers, but the church eyed them warily, accusing some of heresy or sin. One curious custom. Some Beguines wore a plain pledge ring, symbolizing their loyalty to their community, not to any man. You imagine one on your finger, simpler than the miller's heavy betrothal band. Historians still debate whether the Beguines were persecuted for their beliefs or merely for their freedom. But as you spin, you can feel that shadow, the weight of suspicion, hanging even over their shared looms. You step outside once more. The air smells of damp earth and wood smoke. The morning light feels sharp and alive. Somewhere out there, women are weaving their own freedom thread by thread. And you can't help wondering if one day your own hands might join theirs. The village paths are alive this morning. Neighbors hauling baskets, herding goats, calling one another over the noise of clattering carts. Somewhere beyond those winding roads lies a Beguine house the traveling weaver once spoke of, a few towns away. It feels almost like a dream, a place just out of reach. But the weaver's tales came with warnings too. Stories of churchmen raiding Beguine homes, hunting for forbidden books, and townsfolk whispering that the women who lived there were wayward or worse. You think back to the women at the well, their sneers about spinsters, and realize the Beguines face a different kind of gossip. Sharper, darker, edged with fear of witchcraft and sin. You'd trade your patched dress for their gray mantle, yes, but not if it meant painting a target on your back. If Beguines are free, it's the kind of freedom that earns the bishop's suspicious glare. You pause beside the well, the bucket still damp from the morning's draw, and glance at the church's stone tower. The priest's sermons about God's plan never mention Beguines by name, but you've heard him rail against wayward women before. You can guess they're on his list. Joining a Beguine house would mean spinning, nursing, maybe teaching children, but also defending your faith against prying eyes and pointed questions. You're not a heretic, but you're not a nun either, and that middle ground is a dangerous one to walk. Old Mord's poverty flashes in your mind, the spinster scraping by with nothing but gossip for company. The Beguines might offer you more, shared work, shared purpose, a hearth among women. But it would come with constant vigilance. You escape the miller's son's leers, but you might trade them for new accusations. Lifting the bucket, you start back toward the cottage, the village's watchful eyes prickling against your skin. The Beguine life tempts you, independence, work, sisterhood, yet the risks twist your stomach. You've heard rumors of Beguines burned as heretics. The weaver swore was rare, more threat than truth, but you're just a poor girl with no coin and no protection. The church wouldn't hesitate to make an example of someone like you. Your mother's quiet hints about the convent return, stone walls, safe but suffocating. And you wonder if the Beguines are only another kind of trap, one made of freedom and fire. If Beguines are rebels, you think, you prefer rebellion with fewer bonfires. You step inside, the cottage thick with smoke and the smell of wool. Your mother's loom clacks steadily. She hasn't heard of Beguines, or she'd call them reckless. But her silence about your refusal to marry gives you room to dream. You pick up the spindle again, its familiar weight grounding you. You think of their life, spinning, sewing, tending the sick, and of the whispers they'd endure. The village's judgment, your parents' pleading, the church's rules, all push you toward either marriage or the cloister. But the Beguines carve a narrow, dangerous path between the two. You think of the miller's son, of the convent's vows, and realize you'd risk suspicion for even a chance at that kind of life. If Beguines are a haven, it's one guarded by gossips and grim bishops. For now, you spin the wool, listening to the steady drip of the well bucket near the door, weighing risks against the village's tightening noose. You're back by the hearth, the spindle turning slowly in your lap, the uneven thread piles beside you, a tangle of uncertainty. The bucket drips softly near the door, an echo of the village's whispers. Your wool dress, still damp and itchy, clings to your skin. The thought of the Beguines, their gray mantles, their fragile independence, shimmers in your mind, half hope, half danger. But the church's shadow looms large. The priest's unlit candle on the table glints in the light, a reminder of the reach of his authority. Across the room, your mother works the loom, her silence heavy with worry. Outside, the sounds of life swell, cows lowing, children shouting, and your thoughts drift toward another kind of woman entirely. The widow. You've seen them at the market, their lives whispered about with equal parts envy and respect. Women who've been wives, but through loss, had gained something rare, a measure of freedom. You wonder if that freedom could ever be yours. In medieval Europe, widows held a strange, in-between power. By the 14th century, some could inherit land, run businesses, or manage households on their own. They had more control than wives or spinsters, though still bound by custom and law. For a peasant like you, widowhood might mean freedom from a man's rule, though not from the weight of the village's expectations. And to get there, you'd have to survive marriage first, a grim wager with a miller's son. You recall something the weaver said, that widows often wore wimples, veils that marked both their respectability and their independence. You picture one on Agnes, your sharp-tongued neighbor who runs her own market stall. Historians might argue whether widowhood was true freedom or just another burden, but as you spin, it feels like a cruel kind of promise, freedom that comes only after loss. The fire's embers fade, and you glance toward your mother, her shuttle moving in rhythm. She's no widow, but she's told you about Agnes, how her husband drowned in a ditch one drunken night. Now Agnes sells eggs and herbs, her laughter quick and cutting enough to silence gossip. You remember the women at the well, their sneers at spinsters, and compare them to Agnes's brisk nods. She's respected, even if not adored. Her wimple veil shields her like armor. Widowhood suddenly seems golden. No husband, no convent, no master but herself. But the thought of enduring a marriage just to earn that veil makes your stomach twist. You stand, stirring the dying embers, coaxing a small flame to life. Widowhood's freedom comes with a cost. Surviving childbirth, surviving the man, surviving his debts. You've seen widows lose their land to greedy kin, or end up begging on the church steps. But then there's Agnes, steady, shrewd, and self-reliant. Proof that it's possible. You think of old Maud's lonely poverty, the Beguines' risks, and realize widowhood might be the only path that lets a woman truly stand on her own. If widowhood is freedom, you think, Riley, you better hope for a very short marriage. The smoke stings your eyes as you consider the church's teachings. Widows aren't free from its rules. They're expected to stay chaste or risk scandal, but they can say no to remarriage, and that alone is a kind of power. You picture yourself at the market, a wimple veil fluttering as you barter over eggs. No miller's son to answer to, but it's a risky dream. You'd have to wed, outlive him, and survive everything that comes in between. You pick up the spindle once more, its weight steady in your hands. Outside, the village hums. Laughter, carts creaking, the sound of life that moves on whether you do or not. Widowhood's freedom glimmers in your thoughts, but it's a distant shore across a stormy sea. The Beguine house, the convent's walls, the village's scorn, all the paths before you seem uncertain. The church's grip, your parents' fear, the miller's looming shadow, they all close in. You spin the wool tighter, the thread pulling firm between your fingers, and brace yourself for the truth. Freedom, even Agnes's kind, might always stay just out of reach. If widowhood is a crown, then you're polishing someone else's first. For now, you keep spinning. The loom's rhythm beats steady behind you as you hold the thought of widowhood like a fragile hope, shimmering, but too costly to grasp. You're still by the hearth, the spindle warm in your hands, the wool twisting unevenly as it gathers in your lap. The fire's embers flicker weakly, the smoky air curling around your damp, itchy dress. On the table, the priest's unlit candle catches the morning light, a small glint of power you'll never hold. The stories of widows like Agnes, with their market stalls and measured freedom, linger in your mind, but the price, surviving a marriage to the miller's son, is too steep. The convent's vows and the Beguine's risks hang in the air as half-answers, none of them safe. Outside, the village is stirring. Goats bleating, merchants haggling, voices rising with the sun. Inside, you feel the pressure closing in. Your parents' whispers have grown sharper, your mother's quiet pleas turning into plans. The church's rules, the village's scorn, your family's desperation, they're all pushing toward one outcome, a forced marriage. You can feel the noose tightening, every conversation inching you closer to the altar. In medieval Europe, forced marriages were common, especially among peasant families like yours, where survival often depended on alliances sealed by a daughter's vows. By the 13th century, the church officially required consent, but consent could be wrung from tears, shame, or the threat of being cast out. Some families use a simple cord tied around a daughter's wrist to symbolize her betrothal. You dread the thought of your mother pulling one from her apron, a soft tie that feels more like a rope. Historians still debate whether those knots were symbolic or outright intimidation, but as you spin, you can almost feel that cord tightening around your own throat. The stool creaks as you shift, glancing toward your mother. Her loom clacks on, relentless, and though she says little, her lips are pressed tight, a sure sign she's made up her mind. The tanner's boy, she mutters at last, not meeting your eyes. Your stomach drops. He's older, with rough hands like bark and breath sour with ale. Through the window, you can hear your father's low voice outside, talking to a neighbor, probably the tanner's kin. You think back to the women at the well, their jeers about spinsters, and realize this time your family isn't waiting for your answer. They've already decided. The tanner's bit of land could ease your family's hunger, and you are the price. If marriage is a trade, you think bitterly, then you're the bargain no one wanted to make. You set the spindle aside and stir the fire, hiding the tremor in your hands. Your parents' pleas have hardened into plans, and the villagers' whispers about curse wounds only give them fuel. You've heard of girls dragged to the church, their vows forced out through sobs or threats of being thrown from home. Your father's temper, your mother's fear, they become a united front, and the tanner's boy is the prize they've chosen. You look toward the table. The priest's candle sits there, mocking you, its flame unlit, a hollow symbol of consent. That means nothing when family and church stand together. The air feels thick, choking. You think of old Maud, shunned for her refusal, and realize your parents will never let you become her, not when their survival depends on your obedience. Outside, your father's boots crunch in the mud, his voice sealing the deal that will cage your life. The tanner's boy, with his rough voice and callous hands, becomes your new shadow. Saying no again might mean losing your place in this cottage altogether. If betrothals are knots, you pray for a blade sharp enough to cut them. You think of Agnes in her market stall, her laughter ringing over her baskets of eggs. But that kind of freedom comes only after widowhood, not before. Forced marriage blocks every path you've dreamed of. You sit again, the spindle heavy in your lap. The noise outside, the clatter of a cart, the laughter of children, only makes the walls feel closer. Your mother pauses, her weaving long enough to meet your eyes. "You'll see reason soon," she says quietly. It's not a plea, it's a warning. The church, the village, your family, they're all conspiring to push you toward the altar, and your refusals are running out. You think of the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and realize neither is a choice at all. If marriage is a dance, you're being dragged to the floor with no music. For now, you spin the wool, the fire dimming beside you, bracing for the storm gathering over the muddy village roads. You're still by the hearth, the spindle trembling between your fingers. The wool slips, the thread unravels, and the fire's glow fades to ash. The smoky air fills your lungs as your mother's loom resumes its steady beat. Her earlier words, the tanner's boy, hang between you like smoke. The thread of marriage, the promise of knot you can't untie, hangs heavy. The widow's freedom, so far away, feels like a cruel dream. Outside, the sounds of the village grow louder, hammers striking, voices bartering. Inside, the weight of law presses in. You've begun to realize that marriage isn't just a family's will. It's the church's cage, too. In medieval Europe, the law left little space for defiance. Canon law demanded consent. But courts rarely cared about coercion, favoring alliances and property instead. A poor girl's protest was just noise to be silenced. You remember hearing of women who tried to avoid unwanted marriages by claiming pre-contracts, swearing they were already betrothed to someone else. Some even invented suitors. But priests saw through lies as easily as smoke, and for a girl without wealth or witnesses, the trick would fail. Historians might debate whether these loopholes offered real escape, but to you, they sound like false doors in a locked room. The chains of law are invisible, but they're tighter than rope. You shift on the stool, the faint warmth of the fire barely reaching your knees. Your mother's weaving never stops. She's mentioned the tanner's boy twice now, and you can tell from her tone that her mind's made up. Your father, too, is likely finalizing it. His voice outside low and decisive. If you refuse, they'll take you to the church court, where refusal is treated as sin. You've heard of girls fined or shamed for their defiance, their families punished for their disobedience. The law is now on your side. It was never written for you. If consent is a law, you think, it's written in ink only men can read. You stand and step to the door, the air outside sharp with wood smoke and damp earth. The village path is alive, merchants haggling, children running, carts creaking past, but you feel caged all the same. The law says you must consent, but your parents' threats and the hunger in their eyes leave you no real choice. You think of old Maud's poverty, of the convent's walls, of the Beguine house far beyond reach. The church's rules, the family's fear, the village's gossip, they've all joined hands to trap you. You imagine standing before a priest, his sharp eyes waiting for your vow, and the words catching your throat. The law may speak of free will, but freedom has never been for girls like you. If laws are chains, you think grimly, then yours were forged long before you were born. You sit again, the spindle heavy in your lap, and listen to the hum of the village outside, the bark of a dog, the clang of a hammer, the faint murmur of your father's voice. Then your mother's loom stops. She looks up at you, her face unreadable, and says quietly, "The tanner's coming tomorrow." It's not a question anymore, it's a sentence. The church, the village, the law, they've all joined hands to push you toward a vow you can't stomach. You think of the miller's son and the tanner's boy, and realize the law doesn't care which one claims you. Either way, it demands obedience. You spin the wool, the thread pulled tight between your fingers, bracing yourself for the grip of betrothal you never chose. If marriage is a contract, you think bitterly, you're signing with invisible ink and no choice at all. For now, you keep spinning. The heart's embers are cold, and the laws that bind you feel tighter than any rope. You're still by the cottage hearth, the spindle trembling in your hands. The wool twists unevenly, mirroring the turmoil in your chest. The smoky air clings to your itchy wool dress, heavy and suffocating. The embers glow faintly, barely alive. Your mother's loom clacks in steady rhythm behind you. The sound doesn't comfort you anymore. It feels like a countdown. Tomorrow the tanner's boy will come, and every beat of that loom marks another step toward it. The laws of marriage, those hollow promises of consent and sacred vows, have you trapped. The threat of being forced into the tanner's rough hands looms larger now, darker even than the miller's leers ever did. Outside, the village hums with life. Bells tolling, merchants haggling, goats bleating in the distance. But inside your chest there's only dread. You've heard the whispers of what happens next if you resist. The church courts. The thought alone makes your heart race like a startled hare. In medieval Europe, such courts ruled over marriage disputes. By the 13th century, canon law governed everything from betrothals to vows, and defiance wasn't seen as bravery. It was sin. For a girl like you, refusal could summon priests in black robes to judge your soul. They'd listen to your family and your suitor, weigh your virtue, and in the end, side with whoever kept the peace, not whoever told the truth. Some courts even used a truth candle, lit during testimony to expose lies. You glance at the unlit candle on your own table and shudder, wondering if it's destined to burn at your trial. Historians might argue whether those courts protected women or simply enforced obedience, but you already know which side wins. Control always does. You shift on the stool, the faint warmth of the hearth fading as you glance toward your mother. Her loom doesn't pause, her voice still echoing in your ears. The tanner's coming tomorrow. It wasn't advice. It was a verdict. If you refuse again, you'll be sent before a priest's bench. You've heard of girls hauled there before, scolded, fined, shamed until they broke. One from a nearby village was branded obstinate and forced to wed after her family begged forgiveness. You remember the women at the well, their cruel jokes about spinsters, and realize how much worse the gossip would be if you were condemned by the church. Not just stubborn now, sinful. Your hands shake, the spindle wobbles. If courts are fair, you think grimly, maybe you'll get a judge who can't light his own candle. You set the spindle down and step toward the open door. The air outside is sharp with the smell of wood smoke and wet earth. The village paths are alive with noise, merchants shouting, children darting between carts, but you feel no part of it. You feel caged. The church's reach is everywhere. If your family drags you to court, you'll stand before men like the priest who lectured you last week, his eyes cold and cutting. They'll ask why you refuse. Pride, vanity, a secret lover? The truth, that the tanner's temper frightens you, will sound like blasphemy to them. The church doesn't care for fear. It cares for order. You think of old Maud's hut on the edge of the village, her lonely life. A court's fine could send you there too, or straight to the altar. The smoke stings your eyes as you think about that truth candle again, its flame meant to expose falsehood, but more often used to force surrender. You have no coin for bribes, no kin with influence. The tanner's family would side with your parents. Their land deal depends on it. The Beguine house and the convent, those faint dreams of escape, could be blocked too if the church brands you disobedient. You've even heard of women exiled for defying marriage. Their names struck from parish rolls, erased like they never existed. Your mother's loom stops for a moment. Her gaze flickers toward you. She doesn't need to say anything. You can see it in her eyes. Fear for the family's future outweighs fear for yours. If trials are holy, you think, you'll need a very forgiving saint. You sit again, lifting the spindle. It feels heavier now, as if the weight of the law itself hangs from it. Outside, a hammer rings out, a dog barks. Life goes on, but you can feel the shadow of the court creeping closer. The priest's sermons, your parents' warnings, the village's scorn, they're all funneling into the same path, pushing you toward vows you'll never mean. You think of the miller's son, the tanner's boy, two names, one fate. A court won't care which man it is, as long as you kneel. The thread in your hand snaps, sharp and final. If church courts are justice, you think bitterly you'll need a miracle or a very short hearing. You're still by the hearth, clutching the spindle. The broken thread lies tangled in your lap. The embers are gone cold, the air thick with smoke. Your dress scratches against your skin, and your mother's weaving resumes, each clack of the loom striking like a drumbeat of inevitability. Tomorrow the tanner will come. The law will follow. The church will bless it, and your choices will vanish. Outside, the noise of the village begins to fade. Carts slow, voices soften. The stillness leaves space for a new, darker thought, exile. If you keep refusing, they might cast you out entirely. You've heard the stories. Women driven beyond the village edge, marked as outcasts, their names whisper like curses. In medieval Europe, exile was real, both legal and social. By the 14th century, villages like yours relied on conformity. A daughter who refused to marry risked breaking that fragile order. Sometimes she was banished outright. Other times, exile came quietly. No one trading with her, no one speaking her name, no seat at feasts, no home but the edge of the woods. You imagine a patch sewn onto your cloak, a wanderer's mark, a warning, a scarlet badge of rebellion. Historians can debate whether exile was punishment or ostracism, but to you, it would feel the same either way. Alone, you shift on the stool, the wood groaning under you. Your mother's loom falters for a moment, her lips tight, her silence heavier than words. You know she's thought about the risk too, what your refusal could cost. The family's name, their land, their fragile standing in the village. You think of the women at the well again, how easily their mockery could turn to rejection. You've heard of a girl from a nearby village cast out for saying no, now begging along distant roads, her name reduced to a warning. You can feel her shadow stretching toward you. If exile's a journey, you think, you'd better hope for a map and sturdier shoes. You stand, stepping toward the open door again. The air is cooler now, carrying the scent of damp straw and distant rain. The village paths are quieter, but the glances linger. A few neighbors look your way, eyes sharp, whispering. You can almost feel the space around you narrowing, the first edges of exile forming. Because exile doesn't always come from a priest's decree. Sometimes it starts with silence. The way no one meets your gaze, the way no one buys your thread. You think of old Mortigan, her hut crouched on the village's edge, her life a half-step from oblivion. Refusing the tanner's boy could push you right past her, out where the fields end and the wild begins, a place where no one cares if you live or starve. You grip the doorframe, the wood rough and splinter beneath your fingers, and wonder just how far defiance can take you before it finally breaks you. Smoke curls lazily through the cottage, the air thick and heavy, and your thoughts drift toward the church court, that looming place of judgment with its so-called truth candle, waiting to expose your stubbornness as sin. A guilty verdict could mean fines your family can't pay, or worse, a formal banishment that would strip you of your home, your name, and whatever sliver of safety you still have. You think about the Beguine house, the convent walls, all those paths of escape, but exile doesn't offer choices. The exiled wander, marked by shame or a scrap of cloth stitched to their cloak. You have no coin, no kin beyond these muddy roads, and the outside world is dangerous. Bandits hunger and nights too cold to survive. You glance toward your mother. Her loom is quiet now, the rhythm gone, her silence thick with dread. You can't help but wonder, would she beg you to marry just to save you from this fate? If exile is freedom, you think grimly, it's the kind that comes with wolves and no blanket. You sit again, lifting the spindle. Its weight feels small but steady, the faintest anchor in a world spinning out of control. Outside, the sounds of life continue, a child's laughter, a cow's low groan. Simple reminders of the world still moving while yours stands still. You can feel the village closing in around you, its walls invisible but suffocating. Your parents' pleas, the priest's warnings, the villagers' scorn. They all press you toward two choices, the altar or the road. You think of the miller's son and the tanner's boy, knowing neither is worth the cost of staying. But exile's price may be higher still. The wool slips through your fingers, fragile and thin, and you brace for the moment when your defiance might cast you out completely, into a world no kinder than the one you're trying to leave. If exile is a story, you think, you can only hope you're the hero and not the tragedy. For now, you keep spinning. The hearth's cold embers glow faintly, a mirror of your uncertain future, and you face the grim thought of life beyond the village's reach. You're still by the hearth, the spindle trembling in your hands. The wool twists unevenly, a fragile thread, like your resolve. Your wool dress itches against your skin, and the cold air bites. The dead embers stare back at you, mirroring the dread that comes with thoughts of exile, those lonely roads, those wanderers patches sown like brands of shame. Smoke clings to the air, your mother's loom still silent. Her warning about the tanner's visit tomorrow sits heavy in your chest. Between the court's judgment and the village's gossip, the noose feels impossibly tight. But as the afternoon hum outside softens, bird song, distant footsteps fading, a new, harsher truth creeps in. Even if you escape marriage, exile, or court, you'll still have to face something just as bleak. Work. A life of meager, endless toil. The only path left to a woman who refuses to wed. In medieval Europe, a spinster's options were as thin as the thread she spun. By the 14th century, unmarried women, especially peasants, were shut out of most trades. They worked where they could, spinning, weaving, scrubbing floors, or serving in other people's homes for scraps of bread. Some even made rushlights, crude candles twisted from reeds and dipped in tallow, sold for pennies. You picture old Moore at the market, her hands slick with grease, her basket half empty, her life small, dimly lit. Is the future waiting for women like you? Historians might argue whether that kind of work gave women independence or only prolonged their poverty. But as you spin the wool, the truth feels clear. This isn't freedom. It's a quieter kind of cage. The stool groans as you shift. The priest's unlit candle catches the light again, that symbol of faith and authority, mocking in its stillness. From the doorway, you hear your mother's voice, sharp and tired, haggling with a neighbor over a sack of oats. This, spinning wool, trading skeins for bread or firewood. This is what's left for you if you keep saying no. You've seen Mord's thin skeins at the market, barely earning enough for a loaf. And you remember those women at the well, their sneers about cursed spinsters. Work won't protect you from their scorn. It'll only make you too tired to care. If spinning's a career, you think dryly, you're well on your way to employee of the century, with no pay. You stand, setting the spindle aside, and poke at the cold embers in the hearth as if they might spark a way out. Other jobs come to mind, worse ones, scrubbing pots in the Lord's kitchen until your back breaks, brewing ale in smoky taverns for drunks who leer and haggle over every coin. You've helped your mother clean the tanner's floors before, his son's stare following you the entire time. The memory makes you shudder. Work isn't just labor, it's exposure. Every task leaves you open to judgment, to danger, to wandering hands. You think of the Beguine houses again, women working side by side, earning together, living by their own rules. But that dream feels as distant now as widowhood's freedom once did. The smoke swirls around you as you imagine yourself dipping reeds in tallow, your hands sticky, your eyes straining by candlelight. Honest work, yes, but barely survival. You think of your parents' pleas, the church's warnings, and know that spinning and toil won't ease their fear or yours. Without marriage, you'll be locked out of land, mills, or markets. A spinster's labor is just a bandage on a wound that won't heal. If work's a ladder, you think half the rungs are missing. You sit again, lifting the spindle once more. The wool feels heavier now. Outside, the village is quieted. A dog barks. A child hums somewhere down the path. And yet it all feels smaller, more distant. Your mother returns, her face lined with exhaustion. She doesn't speak. She doesn't have to. Her silence says it all. You are a burden. You think of the tanner's rough hands and know you'd rather spin until your fingers bleed than marry him. But spinning, serving, brewing, they're all the same slow grind toward Mord's lonely fate. If labor's a song, you think you're stuck singing the chorus with no melody. For now, you keep spinning. The heart's ashes lie still, and your hopes feel as faint as the last traces of smoke curling through the air. You face the work that awaits. The only path left to a woman who dares to say no. The spindle trembles again in your hands. The wool slips, thin and weak. The cold embers glow dully, a reflection of what your life might become. Spinning, serving, or scraping for survival. The smoky air stings your eyes. Your mother's silence weighs heavier than any scolding could. The tanner's threat, the court's shadow, the specter of exile, they've all tightened around you like invisible ropes. And now, as the village settles into evening quiet, another grim thought comes: charity. The kind that feeds but never frees. In medieval Europe, charity was a final safety net for women like you. Bread from the church, broth from a neighbor, a patched cloak from a wealthier hand. But every gift carried shame. Alms were not kindness. They were control. Some churches even handed out wooden tokens, small chits marked with symbols, to track who received aid and how often. You imagine one in your hand, branded with your failure, a mark no less binding than the wanderer's patch of exile. Historians might call it compassion, but you can feel the truth. Charity isn't a lifeline. It's a leash. You shift on a stool, your body aching. The priest's candle gleams dully on the table, a silent reminder of power in every choice you don't get to make. Behind you, your mother's loom starts up again, clack, 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 steady and sharp. Her silence is louder than words. Without marriage, you eat her porridge, sleep beneath her roof, and every bite feels like a debt. The church's charity, the neighbor's pity, they won't free you. They'll only chain you to their mercy. And in the quiet between the loom's beats, you realize that saying no has made you something worse than disobedient. It's made you visible. A reminder to every woman in the village of what happens when you refuse to kneel. You think back to the well, the sharp laughter, the sneers about cursed spinsters. You can almost hear them still echoing in your head. You picture old Maud standing by the church steps, her hands outstretched, her eyes hollow. That's what they'd make of you, too, a shadow of pity and ridicule. You set the spindle aside and move to the hearth, prodding the cold embers as if you might stir some warmth or maybe a way out. You've seen Charity before. Father Cerruti ladling broth after Mass, his gaze weighing every hand that reached for it, or the merchant's wife tossing crust with a smug sniff, her generosity sharp as a blade. You remember helping your mother deliver alms to a sick widow once, and how the woman flinched when she caught pity in your eyes. That could be you soon, waiting in line for the church's charity, clutching a wooden token, your dress patched thinner each year. You think of the tanner's boy, those rough bark-like hands, and realize you'd rather beg than marry him. But charity isn't life. It's a slow fade. If alms are mercy, you think, they come a side of smugness. Smoke curls through the cottage again as your thoughts turn to your family. Your father's muttering grows louder each day. Your brother's eyes linger with quiet blame. They're barely holding on as it is, and your refusal is just one more weight on their backs. Charity might start at home, a grudging bowl of porridge, but it won't end there. It'll end with you depending on the same village that despises you. You imagine Beguine House again, those shared hearts and weaving hands, or the convent walls where vows could mean safety, but both need coin or courage, and you have neither. The church's charity is tangled with sermons about sin. It might fill your stomach, but it won't cleanse your shame. You glance at your mother, her loom clacking steady as ever, and wonder how long her patience, her love, will hold before it hardens into resentment. You sit back down, lifting the spindle again. It feels heavier now. Outside, the village is hushed. Only a cow lowing, a child humming faintly. You can feel its generosity shrinking with the light. You think again of Maud, her rushlights dim at the market, her hands trembling as she stretches out a palm for bread. Charity won't save you from her fate. It'll just dress it in pity. You spin the wool, thin, uneven, and brace for a life where every alms token reminds you what you've lost. Home, respect, belonging. You think of the miller's son, of the tanner's boy, and no charities know better than their chains. If alms are gifts, you think Riley, you're praying they come with return policy. For now, you keep spinning. The hearth's cold embers glimmer faintly, a mirror of charity's hollow promise. And you face the quiet truth. Dependence waits for any woman who dares to say no. You're still by the hearth, the spindle tight in your hands. The wool tangles in your lap. Frail as your hope, the smoky air stings your eyes. The cold ashes whisper of empty promises, of charity that feeds but doesn't free. Your mother's silence weighs on you, her lips pressed tight, her thoughts circling the tanner's boy. You can feel every trap closing in. The village's judgment, the church court's shadow, the grinding poverty of endless work. But now, as the afternoon breeze drifts through the cracks, another shadow creeps in. Something darker than hunger or shame. Witchcraft, your refusal to marry, your stubbornness, has made you stand out. In a village that thrives on obedience, defiance is dangerous. Whispers have already started, small ones, curling like smoke. By the 14th century, fear of witchcraft was spreading like rot. Women who lived alone, who spoke their minds, or who simply said no, were branded unnatural. For someone like you, turning away the tanner's boy could twist easily into talk of curses or evil eyes. A strange tidbit comes to mind. Villagers once used a witch's knot, a rope tied in a special way to test if it would unravel. You can almost feel it around your wrist now, its loops tightening, daring you to move. Historians might argue whether witchcraft fears were about religion or control. But as you spin the wool, that argument feels hollow. Fear doesn't care about logic. It only needs a name to burn. The stool creaks beneath you. You glance at your mother. Her eyes flick to the door, nervous. She's heard the whispers too. You caught a neighbor muttering at the well, saying your refusal had soured the miller's crops. You remember the sneers, the way their voices sharpened. Witchcraft rumors could turn mockery into mob. You've heard stories, Women accused of cursing cows or spoiling bread, their huts burned, their names erased. One woman fled before the flames reached her. You can almost smell the smoke. Your hands tremble. If you're a witch, you think your only spell is making bad with skeins. You set the spindle aside again and stir the ashes, as if fire could burn away the fear. The village is quick to point fingers. Bad harvest, a sick child, a quarrel unresolved. Anything could become your fault now. You think of Mort again, her hunched figure at the village edge. She's dodged the worst of the gossip, but just barely. One wrong word, one wrong glance, and she could be next. So could you. The priest's eyes come to mind, cold, measuring. He'd call your defiance and maybe even sorcery. You picture the witch's knot again, its ropes tightening, and wonder how you'd ever prove your innocence to people already convinced you're guilty. Smoke swirls through the room. The tanner's boy starts to feel like the safer choice, a cage made of flesh instead of fire. You've heard of women tested by water, dragged to rivers to see if they float, or worse, burned if they couldn't charm a priest into mercy. Your family's barley field won't buy your way out of that, and your mother's silence says she knows it too. Even the Beguines, with their quiet sisterhood, weren't immune. A few gray mantles were already whispered about heretics, witches. You realize now that even piety can't protect you when a village wants someone to blame. The air feels thick, the cottage smaller. You're walking a knife's edge. If you're a witch, you think, your broom stuck sweeping this cottage. You sit again, the spindle heavy in your palms. Outside, a bird trills. A cart rattles faintly by. The air feels dense, watching. Your mother moves to the doorway, glances back, and says softly, "Keep quiet, girl. It's not about sound. It's about survival. The village, the church, even your family, they're waiting for you to bend or break. And if you don't, the whispers will finish the job." You think again of the miller's son, of the tanner's boy. Maybe marriage could shield you, but at what cost? You spin the wool, the thread thinning, and brace for the murmurs that could turn you from spinster to sorceress. If witchcraft's a charge, you think, you're praying for a spell to make this village disappear. For now, you keep spinning. The hearth's cold embers glow faintly, mirroring your fear. The rumors burn hotter than fire ever could. You're still by the hearth, the spindle trembling, the wool fraying in your lap. The air smells of smoke and dread. Your mother's warning hangs between you like a curse. The villagers' scorn, the church court's threat, the cold comfort charity, all of it has cornered you. And now, with even the wind whispering outside, you face the heaviest weight of all, family honor. Your defiance isn't just yours anymore. It stains your kin, seeps through the cottage walls, and echoes down the muddy paths. And as you listen to silence pressing in, you wonder how long before even your family decides it's safer to let the village burn you than to stand beside you. In medieval Europe, family honor was a fragile kind of wealth, one that peasants like you couldn't afford to lose. It wasn't gold or land that kept your family's name alive. It was respect, reputation, the quiet nods exchanged at the market or along the village path. By the 14th century, a daughter's refusal to marry could do more than just stir gossip. It could stain her family's name, fray alliances, and draw scorn sharper than any blade. Some families even hung what was called a kin cloth, a woven strip marked with symbols of their lineage. Above the hearth, a proud display of unity and honor. One hangs in your cottage, too, faded with smoke, but still proud. Tonight, it feels like a rebuke. Historians still argue whether honor was about loyalty or leverage, but as you sit spinning wool, it feels simpler than that. Your refusal has left a mark that won't wash out. You shift on the stool, the wood creaking under you. Your mother stands by the hearth, stirring a thin broth. She hasn't spoken since her last warning, but her silence cuts sharper than her loom's clack ever did. Her slumped shoulders say enough. Your refusal is a wound or a pride, a crack in the family standing. Your father's name, your brother's future, all framed because of you. You think of the women at the well, their whispers about spinsters, but now you realize they weren't just judging you. They were condemning your whole family for failing to tame you. Outside, your father's axe bites into it again and again, each thud carrying his frustration. Above the hearth, the kin cloth hangs heavy with meaning, its rough stitches seeming to accuse you. You reach out to stir the cold embers, as if the fire could burn away your guilt. Refusing the tanner's boy and the miller's son before him hasn't just cost your family a marriage, it's cost them standing. You've seen what happens to those who fall from favor. Fewer trades at the market, doors half shut, polite smiles that don't reach the eyes. You think of old Maud, the spinster at the village's edge, her name long forgotten, her family erased from memory. You wonder if yours will fade too. If honor's a cloak, you think your family's is patched and fraying fast. Smoke curls through the room, soft and bitter. You think about the church's sermons, the priest's words tying family duty to divine order. Marriage, he said, is a thread that holds a village together. And you're the one unraveling it. You picture your younger brother, only 12, being mocked at the mill, or your mother forced to barter grain for less because of your reputation. Maybe the tanner's boy could have saved their name, but you couldn't bear the cost. The kin cloth symbols blur in the dim firelight. Shame sits like a stone on your chest. If shame's a fire, you think your family's hearth is burning low. You lift the spindle again, its weight dragging on your wrists. The quiet outside feels heavy, judgment seeping in through every crack of the cottage. Your mother's eyes avoid yours as she stirs the pot. You can almost hear her thoughts, the losses, the worry, the pride turned to disappointment, the village's whispers, the church's threats, the gossip of witchcraft, all of it piles high. But it's this, the slow unraveling of family honor, that hurts most. You think of the almshouse, of convent walls, places where you might hide your name, but you know neither could wash away the stain. You spin the wool, the thread fragile, and brace yourself for the shame that might finally snap what's left of your family standing. Your stool creaks as you shift. You glance at your mother. Her broth bubbles softly, her eyes fixed on the pot. She's told you stories before. The weaver of willow, who spurned a lord and vanished into the woods. The maid of mist, who walked into the fog rather than to the altar. You think of the women at the well. The sneers, yes, but also the quiet nods. Maybe some of them tell these same tales in secret. You've heard Marjorie hum a ballad at the market, a clever lass who tricked a suitor with riddles. Her laugh cut through the noise like sunlight. Those stories aren't just fantasies. They're armor, and you're hungry for their strength. If folklore's a shield, you think, you're hoping for one woven with dragon-proof thread. You rise, setting the spindle aside, and move to the open door. The cool air carries the scent of damp straw and earth. The paths outside are hushed, but you imagine Joan and Marjorie by their own fires, spinning their defiance into stories. You've heard of the weaver willow, her loom singing under the stars, or the maid of mist slipping through fog to escape a priest's wrath. Real or not, they fuel your resolve. Their moon cords are symbols of freedom, and if you knew how, you'd braid one tonight. You think of old Maud, the spinster everyone shuns, and wonder she knows these stories too, if they keep her warm in her crumbling hut. The smoke stings your eyes as you glance up at the kin cloth hanging above the hearth. Its faded symbols remind you of your family's shame, but folklore's tales offer a different legacy. Not one of obedience and honor, but defiance and survival. You've heard stories of women who curse suitors with nettles or summon wolves to guard their paths. Impossible, maybe, but inspiring. The church calls those stories pagan. Yet the women still whisper them, their voices quiet rebellions in the dark. You think of Joan's knowing nod and realize these stories tie you to her, to Marjorie, to all of them. If tales are magic, you think you prefer one that skips the frog-kissing part. You sit again, picking up the spindle. It feels lighter this time. Outside, a bird chirps, a dog barks somewhere down the lane. You feel something new, a flicker of courage. Your mother keeps stirring the broth, her silence deep as ever. But in your mind, you hear the weaver willow's laughter, the maid of mist soft steps through the fog. You start to wonder how to weave your own story. The church, the village, the tanner's boy, all of them push you toward the altar. But folklore's women walk a different path. Their courage burns low but steady, like embers that refuse to die. You think of the miller's son, the witchcraft rumors, the gossip at the well, and you know now that these tales aren't just comfort. They're a map. If folklore is a map, you think, you're ready to follow it. even if it leads through briars. For now, you keep spinning. The hearth's embers glow faintly, mirroring your growing resolve. You draw strength from the whispered legends that swirl through your village. The women who dared, who resisted, who lived free. You're still by the hearth, the spindle turning steadily. The wool gathers neatly in your lap, its thread stronger than before. Your dress itches against your skin, but the faint warmth from the fire feels different now, as though the old tales themselves are breathing life back into the room. You think of the weaver willow, the moon chords, the stories of defiance whisper beneath the priest's sermons. They're stirring something in you, something brave enough to stand against the tanner's boy, against the shame, against the church's judgment. The air smells of smoke and broth. Your mother's silence fills the space between you, heavy with worry. Tomorrow, she said, the tanner's boy will come again. But you're not the same girl who sat trembling by the fire a week ago. The village's scorn, the witchcraft rumors, the family shame, they've all forged your resolve. Outside, the light fades. The air cools. The distant bells of the church echo softly, calling the faithful to evening prayer. You pause, listening, and wonder if even heaven itself could tempt you now. In medieval Europe, the church promised salvation through marriage. By the 14th century, women were taught that obedience and childbirth were holy, that to serve a husband was to serve God. Refusal meant rebellion, not only against society, but against heaven itself. Priests spoke of Eve's sin, of duty and redemption. They offered blessing beads, small rosaries for brides-to-be, tokens of divine favor. You imagine one in your hand now, smooth and cool, glinting in the candlelight beside the priest's unlit candle. Historians might argue whether those promises were genuine faith or clever control, but as you spin the wool, salvation feels like a velvet snare, soft, warm, but inescapable. You glance at your mother. The broth steams, her eyes fixed on the pot. You've heard her whisper prayers for heaven's rewards when your father's anger burned too hot. You think of the women at the well again, their sneers backed by Scripture. Marriage is holy, defiance is sin. The priest's sermon still echoes, spinsterhood leads to ruin, obedience to grace. You've seen women at Mass, clutching rosaries, their faces peaceful under the promise of heaven. But you can't tell if it's peace or surrender. If salvation's a ticket, you think, you're hoping for a seat that doesn't come with a tanner beside you. You stand again, stirring the embers to coax a spark. The church's promise is everywhere, in the cross above the door, in every sermon and hymn. Eternal reward for a lifetime of obedience. You think of the tanner's boy, his rough hands and short temper, and wonder how such misery could ever be sacred. The priest would say it's your cross to bear. You've prayed before, for rain, for your brother's fever, but praying for a husband feels like pleading with a God who's already made up his mind. And you can't help but wonder, did old Maud, the woman they call cursed, ever believe in those promises too? Or did she, like you, finally decide that freedom, even in scorn, is worth more than heaven's chains? You wonder if old Maud ever held those blessing beads before she chose her lonely path. The cottage smoke stings your eyes, and your thoughts drift between two worlds, the church's promises and the whispers of folklore. The weaver of willow's defiance clashes in your mind with the priest's soft-spoken promise of salvation. Those old tales give you courage, but the church offers something harder to ignore, certainty. Mary, obey and heaven awaits. Your gaze lifts to the kin cloth above the hearth. Its faded stitches once symbols of family pride, now reminders of your defiance. You wonder if salvation, if marrying the tanner's boy, could mend your family's broken honor. Your mother's quiet faith tugs at you. Her soft prayers are a constant pull toward the church's promise. Yet your heart strains in the other direction, toward Joan's knowing nod, Marjorie's laughter, and the sisterhood knots tied in secret as a vow of freedom. You know deep down that the church's reward comes with chains. If heaven's the prize, you think, there must be a loophole in the fine print. You sit again, the spindle heavy and grounding in your hand. The village outside is quieted. Only the lowing of cows and the hum of a child somewhere down the lane. You feel the church's pull, soft, comforting, but insistent. Your mother stirs a cooling broth, her silence a wordless plea for you to take the safe road. The tanner's boy, the blessing beads, the life of quiet submission. Around you, Everything seems to press in. The gossip, the rumors of witchcraft, the shame of a family teetering on the edge of disgrace. But still, folklore's fire burns stubbornly. You think of the miller's son, of the church court's cold judgment, and realize the truth. The church's law is a gilded cage. You spin the wool, pulling the thread taut, bracing yourself against the temptation to trade your rebellion for divine approval. If salvation's a deal, you tell yourself you're holding out for better terms. The faint embers glow on the hearth, their flickering light matching your own wavering resolve. You weigh the church's promise of redemption against the ache in your chest, the part that longs to remain your own. You're still by the fire, the spindle turning between your fingers, the wool piling neatly in your lap. The itchy dress against your skin reminds you of your place, but also of your strength. The embers glow faintly, warmed by thoughts of salvation and its traps. The church's promise whispers in your mind, heavenly reward, restored honor, safety. The tanner's boy could erase your family's shame. Yet every spark of smoke that curls through the air reminds you of something else. The defiant tales, the sisterhood's courage, the quiet acts of women who chose freedom over fear. Your mother's pot cools beside her. Her silence is thick, not anger, but hope slipping into resignation. She wants peace, not rebellion, but you can't give in. Outside, the light fades and the air grows still. The faint breeze carries the sound of distant dogs barking, the hum of men's laughter at the alehouse. You feel the shift in the air, a new threat rising. It's not just gossip now. It's resentment. Your refusal to marry isn't just a scandal. It's a wound to their pride. In a village like this, that's dangerous. In medieval Europe, a man's status depended on marriage. By the 14th century, securing a wife wasn't just about affection. It was about land, labor, and legacy. A woman's refusal, especially from a peasant family, could be seen as an insult. It wasn't only a rejection of a suitor, but a challenge to the order that kept men on top. And insults like that fester. Some spurned men carved scorn marks, crude symbols etched into a woman's door or fence. Public brands of humiliation. You dread waking one morning to find such a mark on your cottage, a visible scar of the tanner's boy's wrath. Historians may still argue whether this resentment was personal or political, but sitting here, spinning in the dim light, it feels like a storm gathering at your doorstep. The stool creaks beneath you. Your mother mends a torn cloak by the hearth, her eyes fixed on the needle. She's heard the whispers, the men at the alehouse calling you uppity, laughing over your refusal of the miller's son. You can feel their mockery seeping through the walls, carried on the night air. And the tanner's boy, his pride's been wounded the most. You saw in his eyes at the market, his hands clenched tight around a bundle of bark. His glare said everything his words did not. Your refusal has become more than rebellion, it's provocation. If resentment's a fire, you think, you're dodging flames without a bucket. You rise and step to the open door. The air outside is cool, sharp with the smell of earth and damp straw. Down the road, a few men gather outside the alehouse, their laughter low and rough. The tanner's boy stands among them, his broad shoulders tense, his eyes cutting your way. You grip the doorframe, feeling the splinters bite your palm. The weight of their resentment presses heavy. And you know it's not just gossip anymore. It's a warning. You think of old Mortigan, the shunned woman on the village's edge. Did she face this too? The turning backs, the angry glances, the quiet threats? Your refusal has shaken their world, where men choose and women obey. And you know that kind of world does not take kindly to cracks. The smoke from your hearth stings your eyes again. You think of the church's promises, its peace, its salvation through obedience. Marriage to the tanner's boy could silence the laughter, calm the anger, mend your family's standing. But when you picture his rough hands and his hard glare, it feels less like salvation and more like surrender. You think instead of the weaver Willow, her defiance echoing in your mind, and of Joan and Marjorie, their sisterhood knots tied tight like a secret armor. Their courage is your shield, but the men's hostility is a louder, more dangerous enemy. It could turn to violence or exile. If men's pride is a castle, you think you're storming it with a spindle. You return to your stool, the spindle steady in your hands. The village outside hums faintly. A bird calls, a hammer rings from afar, and beneath it all, the quiet beat of tension. You stand, poke the embers, and stare into the glow. These rumors aren't just gossip, they're weapons. If the village believes them, you could lose more than land, your voice, your freedom, your place in the world. You've heard of women locked away, prayed over, silenced. You think of old Mort again. Her muttering dismisses insanity, and wonder if she was simply another woman who dared to say no. The priest would back the claim, of course. To defy a man's will is to defy God's plan. You shudder, imagining their tests of your sanity. Still, the folklore echoes in your mind. The weaver of willows, whose quiet defiance shielded her from lies. Maybe madness itself could be reclaimed. Turn from curse to rebellion. Joke number 2. If madness is a play, you're hoping for a script rewrite. You sit again. The spindle turns, your hands trembling but steady. Outside, the village hums low. A dog barks. A crow calls. Your mother's loom clacks softly, a rhythm of pleading conformity. But you keep spinning. The thread is strong. You will stronger. You're no lunatic. Only a woman who will not be owned. Joke number 3. If madness is a song, you're singing it solo, with no applause. The embers fade, the shadows lengthen. Your courage flickers, but does not die. You know the cost of being branded unstable. But you also know the price of obedience. Then comes a new threat, guardianship. If the rumors don't silence you, the law might. A guardian could strip you of the little freedom you have, placing you under a man's control, father, brother, or uncle, for your own good. In the 14th century, this was common for women like you. It was said to protect the family, but it was really another chain. Some even tied a ward knot around a woman's wrist to mark ownership. You can almost feel it tightening, your brother's small hands fumbling at your father's command. Joke number 1. If guardianship's a leash, you're praying for a very clumsy dog. You stand again, stepping to the door. The night air is cool, the scent of wet straw rising. You imagine your father plotting with the tanner's kin, deciding who should handle you. Guardianship would mean no walks to the well alone, no market barters, no freedom to say no again. You think of old Maud. Did she escape this fate, or just outlive it? The church calls submission holy. The priest's eyes make it law. You grip the doorframe, feeling the splinters dig into your skin. Every act of defiance tightens a rope, but you can't stop now. Joke number 2. If guardianship's a cage, you're hoping for a lock with a bad key. You return to your stool. The spindle spins, steady and certain. Your mother mends a blanket nearby, her silence screaming despair. The village will nod in approval if your father takes control, calling it proper. Even your brother, barely 12, could be your keeper. The thought chills you. Joke number 3. If guardianship's a story, you're praying for a plot twist with no wards. Still, you keep spinning. The embers glow faintly, a fragile mirror of your will. Your mother's mended blanket lies folded beside you, the air thick with unspoken pleas. You know she wants the barley strip saved, no matter price. But your defiance has become something bigger than land. As night deepens, you find strength in small rebellions, quiet act of resistance that the church and men cannot see. Spinning your own wool, trading secretly at the market, sharing glances with Joan. These are your weapons. In medieval Europe, women like you relied on such acts to survive. A whispered trade, a hidden pattern woven into cloth. Sigils of defiance known only to a few. You picture one now, hidden in your skein, a thread Joan would recognize. Maybe defiance can be sewn into the world itself. You glance at your mother again, stirring a new pot of broth, eyes averted. She doesn't see the rebellion in your small acts, the late-night spinning, the quiet trades. But you do. Joke number 1. If defiance is a stitch, you're sewed with a very fine needle. You rise once more, step into the doorway. The cool air greets you, laced with the scent of earth and night-blooming flowers. You imagine Joan at her loom, Marjorie brewing ale, each woman resisting in her own quiet way. Together, your small acts weave a hidden tapestry of rebellion, a web strong enough to hold hope. You started saving coin from secret barters, pennies tucked away, dreams stitched in wool. It's not much, but it's yours. The tanner's boy, the guardianship, the whispers of madness, they all fade when you remember this. You still spin your own thread, and that, in this world, is defiance enough. You think about the old folklore, the tale of the weaver of willows, her moonlight not shimmering like threads of defiance. In a quiet way, your own resistance feels much the same, woven knot by knot, act by act. The smoke in the cottage stings your eyes, and once again your thoughts drift to the church's promises of salvation, its lure of peace through marriage. Yet your small rebellions, spinning extra skeins, seeking Joan's knowing nod, reject that path. You've chosen rebellion over submission. You've dodged the tanner's boy twice now at the market, your steps quick, your smile distant. Each escape feels like a small victory, a heartbeat of freedom. The men's resentment, the rumors of madness, they can't touch these quiet moves. Not yet. You glance toward your mother, her broth simmering on the fire, and wonder if she would see her defiance differently if it truly saved the barley strip. Joke number 2. If resistance is a dance, you're stepping lightly. With no music to guide you, you settle again by the hearth. Picking up the spindle, its familiar weight grounding you. Outside, the village rests. A dog barks. An owl calls. You feel the strength of your small axe building, strand by strand. Your mother stirs a broth, her silence heavy with unspoken pleas to give in. But you think of the miller's son, the tanner's boy, and you know your defiance threads are stronger than their chains. The church, the village, even the threat of guardianship all press you toward the altar. Yet these quiet acts, these secret rebellions, keep you free. For now, you spin the wool, the thread tight between your fingers, bracing for the spark that might one day ignite something greater. Joke number 3. If defiance is a fire, you're kindling it with the tiniest sparks. The hearth glows faintly, its embers reflecting the subtle courage that hums beneath your ribs. You draw strength from the resistance that hides under the village's watchful eyes. You're still by the cottage hearth, spindle turning in your hands, the wool twisting into neat, patient coils. Your wool dress scratches at your skin. The smoke curls close, heavy and familiar. Each thread you spin is an act of quiet rebellion, a way to keep your spirit alive despite the tanner's boy, despite the threat of control. Your mother's broth pot sits cold now, her silence heavier than before, her dreams for you still tied to marriage and land. The village's scorn and whispers press at the walls, but tonight something feels different. Outside, the breeze carries a chirp of crickets. You sense a change, faint but real. The village, once harsh and unyielding, seems to be shifting ever so slightly. In medieval Europe, change was slow, but by the 14th century, the old order had begun to loosen. The growing towns and shifting economies made space, tiny spaces, for women like you. A few spinsters found grudging acceptance, not through marriage, but through their work or their quiet piety. Their worth, once dismissed, began to earn a place in the community. Some villages even hung a hearth bloom, a dried flower, on a spinster's door to mark her contribution. You picture one hanging on old Maud's hut, a humble sign of her labor and her endurance. Historians might argue whether this shift was out of practicality or progress, but as you spin, it feels like a soft wind through a once sealed window. You shift, the stool creaking beneath you, and glance toward your mother. She's at the loom again, the rhythm of her weaving steady but tired. Her world still sees only two choices, marriage or ruin, but you've seen something new. A merchant's wife buying Joan's cloth without mockery. A neighbor trading for Marjorie's ale with a nod instead of a sneer. Even at the well, the cruel jokes have turned into quiet acknowledgments. The village isn't embracing you yet, but it's beginning to see women like you differently, as workers, weavers, healers. Joke number 1. If acceptance is a feast, you're getting crumbs, but they're tasty ones. You rise and move to the door. The night air greets you, cool and fragrant with earth and flowers. You imagine Joan at her loom, Marjorie tending her ale vats, their quiet labor softening the village's edges. You've heard whispers of another spinster in a nearby town, her herb garden earning her a place at the market, her door marked with that hearth bloom of quiet respect. It's not revolution. There are no banners, no sermons of praise. Just slow, steady change, the kind that happens beneath notice, like roots growing in the dark. You think of old Mortigan, her rushlights flickering in the distance. Maybe even she feels it, the air shifting, ever so slightly kinder. The church still preaches its sermons. The men still grumble. But now the village's needs, cloth, ale, herbs, begin to outweigh its scorn. And in those small cracks, your defiance finds room to breathe. Joke number 2. If change is a river, you're wading in with soggy shoes. You sit once more, taking up the spindle. The village outside hums softly. The loom's rhythm behind you is familiar, almost comforting. The madness rumors, the church's rules, the threat of guardianship, they're still there. But the world is shifting, even if only an inch. You spin the wool, the thread strong and sure, and feel the faint stirrings of hope for a future where spinsters aren't cursed, but simply free. Joke number 3. If acceptance is a song, you're hearing the first faint notes. The embers glow warm, echoing your quiet optimism. The village's change might be slow, but it's real. And in that slow turn, you find your own kind of peace. You keep spinning. The spindle twirls in your hands, the wool twisting into steady skeins. The ember's light glows against your skin, gentle as the thought of what might come next. Outside, crickets sing and the night deepens. Your mother's loom has gone silent, her mended blanket folded nearby. The tanner's boy, the madness claims, the whispers of control, all still linger, but you feel a calm settling in your chest. Now you think of legacy, not one written in land or airs, but in thread and courage. For women in your time, legacy usually meant family lines and dowries. But your kind of legacy, spun in defiance, traded in secret, writes a different story. Some say spinsters left legacy weaves, cloth stitched with hidden symbols, passed to younger women as gifts of quiet rebellion. You picture your own skein, tight and strong, something Joan might one day hand to another girl who dares to say no. Joke number 1. If legacy is a quilt, you're stitching one with stubborn patches. You stand, moving again to the door. The night air feels cool and alive. You imagine Joan's loom humming, Marjorie's ale brewing. Their lives, their work, their small resistances building something lasting. You face the tanner's boy, the church's threats, and the village's mockery. Yet, you've kept spinning. Each act, each thread, is a mark on history, however small. The smoke from the hearth burns your eyes, and you think again of the weaver willows, her story tangled with your own. Maybe your quiet defiance will become its own tale one day, a whisper passed from woman to woman, proof that saying no isn't madness, but courage. Joke number 2. If legacy is a song, you're humming a tune nobody's heard yet. You sit once more, picking up the spindle. The wool slides between your fingers, soft but firm. Outside, the night is alive with small sounds, a dog barking, an owl calling. You feel your mark taking shape, fragile but real. The church, the rumors, the rules, they can't undo what you've made. Each twist of thread, each quiet act of resistance, is yours alone. Joke number 3. If legacy is a mark, you're carving it with a spindle, not a sword. You spin, and the hearth glows steady beside you. Your thread grows longer, your resolve stronger. And in that moment, peace comes, not loud or triumphant, but gentle, steady. The kind of peace that feels like breathing after storm. You imagine the other women, Joan, Marjorie, even old Maud, each spinning their own stories in the dark. Together, your threads weave something unbreakable. Joke number 1. If peace is a hearth, you're warming your hands on your own fire. The cottage is quiet now. The smoke thins. Outside, the village hums, softer, almost forgiving. The world hasn't changed completely, but it's shifting. You can feel it. You pick up your spindle one last time. The wool gleams faintly in the firelight. You breathe. Joke number 2. If defiance is a song, you're humming a lullaby that soothes only you. The night deepens. The stars shimmer above the thatched roofs. The air is cool and calm. You let your breath slow. Joke number 3. If peace is a weave, you spun a blanket to warm your soul as the night deepens. The spindle rests beside you, your work complete for now. The fire crackles low. The world is still turning. And you, steady, defiant, at peace, sit beneath the stars, wrapped in the quiet strength of your own choosing. To Marjorie, to Maud, and to every woman who ever refused to bow, the spindle slows in your hands, the thread trembling like the pulse beneath your skin. You whisper the words of those old stories under your breath, not as prayers, but as promises. Each tale feels like a spark, each name a torch passed through generations of defiant hands. The weaver of willow, the maid of mist, the widow of hollow mere, names that the priest would call sinful, but that the women carry like saints. You think of how, in another age, they'd write those names in holy books instead of burning them from memory. Outside, the evening fog begins to creep in, curling around the cottages and wells. The mist smells faintly of rain and iron, heavy with the kind of silence that waits for something to happen. You glance toward the path that winds past the church and disappears into the woods, the road that leads beyond the village, toward places you've only heard about, toward freedom, perhaps, or toward another kind of danger. Your mother ladles broth into wooden bowls, her movements slow, automatic. She hasn't mentioned the tanner's boy again, but the way she avoids your eyes says everything. When she finally speaks, her voice is small. "The priest comes at dawn," she murmurs. "He'll bless the match." Your stomach knots. You know what that means. The cords, the vows, the rope around your wrist. You look down at your hands, red and rough from spinning, and imagine them bound together in a blessing you never wanted. Your pulse hammers. The spindle rolls from your lap and clatters against the floor. If defiance is a fire, you think, it's burning now. You rise. The air feels thin. Your mother's face is pale in the glow of the embers, her eyes flicking toward the door as if she already knows what you're about to do. You want to say something, a promise, a goodbye, but the words catch. She looks back to her pot. Silence stretches like thread between you, fragile but unbroken. You step outside. The fog swallows you at once. The path is slick with mud, the air cold enough to sting your lungs. The church bell tolls in the distance, one slow, heavy note. You clutch your shawl tighter and start walking, past the well, past the sleeping cottages, past the spot where the women gossip each morning. Every sound seems louder in the fog, your footsteps, your breath, the faint rustle of leaves. At the edge of the village, the woods begin, tall, dark, and whispering. You hesitate. Everyone knows the stories. Spirits that lead travelers astray, wolves that hunt by moonlight. But the thought of the tanner's boy's breath on your neck drives you forward. Branches scratch your sleeves as you push through the undergrowth. The moon is rising, pale, half-hidden, and its light spills to the leaves in silver threads. You think of the moon cords, those charms of protection braided under night skies, and wish you had one now, but perhaps the moon itself will do. Then you hear it, faint, rhythmic, almost like weaving. The soft thump of a loom? No, too far, too strange. You follow the sound deeper into the woods until you see it. A flicker of light, faint but real. A cottage, smaller than your family's, half swallowed by ivy. Smoke drifts from its crooked chimney. For a heartbeat, you think it's Maud's hut, the old spinster's refuge. But as you step closer, you hear voices. Women's voices. Low, steady, murmuring like a prayer in a language older than the church's Latin. You stop at the threshold, heart pounding. The door creaks open before you can knock. Inside, the room glows with the warm gold of rushlights and the scent of herbs, rosemary, thyme, sage. 3 women sit at a table, their faces shadowed by hoods. One of them, Joan, the weaver, looks up. "I thought you'd come," she says softly. You freeze. "How?" Marjorie, seated beside her, smiles faintly. The well is ears, and courage makes noise even when it tries to hide. The 3rd woman, older, with hair the color of frost, sets down her spindle. You recognize her only after a moment. Maud, the old spinster, the village ghost. But here, her eyes gleam bright. Alive. Joan gestures to the fire. Sit, child. You've been spinning enough to earn a rest. You hesitate, then step inside. The warmth hits you like a memory. Herbs hang from the rafters. Skeins of dyed will dry near the hearth. On the table lies a small pile of braided cords, gray, red, and pale gold. Moon cords, just like in the stories. Maud takes one, smooths it between her fingers, and ties it loosely around your wrist. A sister's knot, she murmurs. No priest blessing needed. The cord feels warm, alive, almost. You stare at it, then at the three women. If the priest finds me gone, he'll think you fled in shame. Joan says, let him. Marjorie chuckles. The church can chase in, not smoke. We're both. You sit by the fire, breath shaking, hands trembling over your knees. The fear still sits heavy in your chest. But it's dulled now, softened by the quiet strength in their eyes. They talk in low tones, of weaving, of harvest, of other women who've joined them from far-off villages. Some live openly as beguines, some hide as widows or healers. Together, they trade cloth for bread, herbs for safety. It's not freedom, not yet, but it's a start. Outside, the night deepens. The wind carries faint echoes of the church bell, tolling midnight. You think of your mother stirring the hearth, your father cursing your name, the priest readying his candle. You think of the well, the whispers the tanner's boy. Then you look at the moon cord on your wrist, its threads glimmering faintly in the firelight, and for the first time, you feel something close to power. If sisterhood's a spell, you think, you're finally learning the words. Maud leans closer. You can stay tonight, but decide by dawn. Stay hidden or take the road north. There's a Beguine house 3 days away in the city. Safer walls. More hands to share the work. You nod slowly. The thought of walking that far alone chills you, but the firelight and the knot around your wrist remind you you're not truly alone anymore. Somewhere, other women are spinning their own threads of defiance. The fire pops, scattering sparks that rise like stars. Joan hums an old tune, one you heard only in fragments at market, the ballad of the Maid of Mist. Her voice is soft, but it fills the room, weaving strength through the air. You close your eyes and let it wash over you, your heartbeat finding the rhythm. When you open them again, dawn is bleeding into the edges of the sky. The fog outside glows silver. Joan hands you a small pouch, bread, a skein of wool, and a sliver of iron for luck. More to adjust your shawl. Marjorie squeezes your hand. Go before the bell rings, she whispers. You step into the mist. The moon cord glints faintly at your wrist. The forest path stretches ahead. Uncertain, yes, but alive with promise. Behind you, the cottage fades into the fog, its rushlights winking out one by one. The priest will rage. The village will whisper. The tanner's boy will curse. But the thread of your story has slipped from their hands. If freedom's a tapestry, you think you've just found the first strand. You walk north, toward the faint hum of distant bells and the promise of other fires. Other women spinning, weaving, surviving. The dawn breaks, pale and cold, but you feel its light on your face like a benediction. And somewhere behind you, in the waking village, a woman at a well glances toward the woods and smiles. Sure, here's how I'll continue your story. I'll stay in that same poetic, vivid, natural tone, historical realism touched with a quiet, folklore-like mystery, and follow her journey north through forests and strange villages into the beginning of a wider network of women and watchers. It'll feel alive and continuous, not concluded. Here's the next part, around 3,000 words, continuing naturally from your last line. The path north wound through fog and frost. The earth was soft beneath your boots, the kind that swallowed sound, leaving only the rhythm of your breath and the whisper of trees leaning close as if to listen. Dawn light caught on each droplet that clung to brambles, and for a moment it looked as if the world itself was beaded in silver thread, your thread spun wide across the land. The moon cord brushed your wrist, its fibers rough but strangely warm. Each time your thought began to darken, the tanner's boy's sneer, your mother's silence, the priest's coming sermon, your fingers found that little knot, and the panic softened as though someone unseen was holding your hand. By midday, your cloak was damp and your stomach hollow, but you pressed on. The forest broke for a stretch of moorland, wind-stung and vast. Heather brushed against your skirts. The air carried the faint scent of peat smoke and distant chimneys. Somewhere beyond those hills, they'd said, stood the Begin house, a place where women lived not as wives or servants, but by their own labor, bound only by shared purpose. But between you and that promise lay miles of wild land and questions that had no easy answers. As the sun dipped low, you reached a stream. Its water ran sharp and clear, catching the sky's fading pink. You knelt, cupped your hands, and drank. The cold rushed through you, startling but cleansing, as though the forest itself had claimed you. Across the stream, you noticed footprints, faint, half erased by wind, and beside them, something glimmered, a scrap of red wool tangled in the briar. You recognized the dye at once. Marjorie's crimson, the shade she used for her festival cords. Your heart lifted. She had been here, or someone like her. The thought steadied your legs and gave you strength to climb the next hill. At its crest, the world unfolded. Fields divided by stone walls, a cluster of cottages hugging a distant road, and beyond them, the faint outline of a monastery tower. The sight filled you with a strange mixture of awe and dread. You'd never been so far from a village. As night fell, you found shelter under a willow by the water's edge. The branches hung low and whispering, their tips brushing the current. You thought of the weaver willow, that old tale of the woman who spun moonlight into bridges to cross rivers that no one else dared ford. Your mother used to mutter in scorn, stories to fill idle heads, but tonight it felt less like a story and more like a prayer. You pulled your shawl tight and watched the water shimmer. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, soft and low. The sound folded into the rush of the stream and the heartbeat of the land. If courage is a thread, you thought, you're learning to spin it fine to end. You woke before dawn to the crack of hooves on the road. 2 carts rolled past, their wheels groaning under sacks of grain. A trader's caravan bound for the next village. You followed at a distance. Hood drawn low, gray fun, they called it, a market town built around a bog that steamed even in winter. The air smelled of damp earth and smoke. The people here dressed differently. Thicker cloaks, heavier boots, faces browned by labor and weather. You kept your head down, but eyes followed you all the same, the way they always did when a woman walked alone. You made for the edge of the square, where a line of stalls stood under patched canvas. Cloth, herbs, bread, candles, the same trade you knew. Familiar, yet not. One stall caught your eye. Its keeper was an older woman with a wide face and clever eyes, her hair bound in a scarf dyed deep indigo. She sold cords and ribbons, some plain, others braided in patterns you half recognized. When she saw your wrist, her mouth curved into something like a smile. "Moon work," she said quietly. "Where did you get that?" "From a friend." You answered, though the word felt too small for what Joan, Marjorie, and Mort had given you. The woman nodded. "You're far from your hearth. Come closer." You did, and she leaned in, voice dropping lower. "There are safe rooms above the dye house by the mill. Tell them the weaver sent you." Before you could ask her name, she turned to another buyer, the conversation done. You moved on, pulse racing. The air around you hummed with the same energy you'd felt in Mord's cottage, quiet but purposeful. That night, you found the dye house. The mills will creak beside it, turning slow and steady in the dark. You slipped inside, following the faint scent of lavender soap and wet wool. Upstairs, a woman stirred a pot of indigo. Another stitched a hem. They looked up when you entered, not surprised, just expectant. "The weaver sent me," you said. At once they smiled. "Then you're safe here." They gave you bread, a pallet by the window, and no questions. You watched them work, dyeing, spinning, sewing, their hands sure, their rhythm hypnotic. When one sang, the others joined in softly, like breath through reeds. The same song Joan had hummed, the ballad of the Maid of Mist. You lay awake long after the others slept, listening to the wheel outside turning like time itself. For the first time since leaving home, you didn't feel lost. You felt part of something, small, secret, alive. Days passed, or perhaps weeks. It was hard to tell when each dawn brought the same thin light and smell of dye vats. You learned to work quickly, your fingers nimble from years at the spindle. In return for your labor, you were given food, warmth, and a little coin, enough to buy new shoes, a comb, a ribbon. At night, the women gathered by candlelight. They shared stories of lost daughters, vanished sisters, forbidden loves. Some were spinsters like you, some widows, some runaway brides. A few even whispered of noble women who had slipped their jewels into river mud and fled to join the Beguines, trading silk for wool and prayer for freedom. You learned their signals: a twist of thread on the wrist, a pattern of knots on the door, a charm made from iron and rowan. Across the countryside, they said, women mark safe places this way. To the church, they were superstition. To the sisterhood, they were maps. One evening, a rider arrived. She wore a heavy cloak streaked with mud and carried a sealed letter. The dye house mistress. They called her Dame Tilda. Read it by firelight, her face still as stone. Then she looked up and said your name. Your heart skipped. Me. She nodded. A message from Maud. You took the letter. The wax seal was pressed with a small symbol, a spindle surrounded by stars. You broke it with trembling fingers. Child of the Willow Road, the tanner's boy seeks you still, and the priest has set a price on your silence. But the wind carries your name kindly among those who remember. Come to us again when you can, for there is work to be done. The threads are gathering. Maud. You read it twice, then a third time, feeling the weight of each word. The others watched quietly. Dame Tilda touched your shoulder. They trust you, she said. That's no small thing. What work? You asked. She smiled faintly. The kind that changes a story before the men can write it. Soon after, a caravan left for the North City, traders and pilgrims bound for the shrine of St. Odelia, patron of healers. You joined them, carrying bolts of dyed wool as your cover. The road wound through frost-hardened valleys, past ruins older than memory. You shared fires with strangers, monks, farmers, a merchant's daughter disguised as a boy. Each had their reason for walking. At night, under the stars, you heard whispers of unrest, harvest failures, taxes, rebellion in distant shires. The church grew richer as the people starved. And always, among the travelers, women passed quiet signals. The twist of a ribbon, the hum of an old song. One night, as snow began to fall, a woman approached your fire. Her cloak was patched but clean, her eyes sharp. You're of the spindle mark, she said. You nodded. Do you know Maud? I knew her teacher, she replied, and her teachers before that. She knelt, drawing a shape in the ash, a spiral that turned inward, then outward again. The threads are gathering, she murmured. Soon there will be weaving that no church will bless, yet all will wear. You didn't understand, not fully, but her voice carried conviction, and it stirred something deep within you. The city was unlike anything you'd imagined, walls higher than trees, bells ringing from towers, markets that stretched for streets. The Beguine house stood near the river. Plain stone walls, open gates, a garden thick with rosemary. Women moved freely through its courtyards, heads uncovered, their laughter echoing like music. You were given a place among them. You worked the looms, tended the dye pots, mended the poor's clothing. In return, you learned letters, numbers, histories written by women's hands. They kept records of births and herbs, of songs and stars. Knowledge that the priests called dangerous, because it belonged to no man. Each night, the sisters gathered to read by candlelight. They spoke of freedom, not the kind won by swords, but by craft, by patience, by persistence. A thread can bind, one said, but it can also lead. Weeks passed into months. You sent word to Maud to the traders who passed between the towns, though you never knew if your messages reached her. The moon cord on your wrist frayed, but you kept it tied. Sometimes, in the deep hours before dawn, you dreamed of your mother, her hands stirring the pot, her eyes soft with things unsaid. You wondered if she still kept your blanket folded by the fire, waiting. You wondered if she'd heard the stories, the runaway girl who joined the Sisterhood of Spinsters and vanished into the world's great web. It was late winter when the first soldiers came. They wore the crest of the Bishop of Hallgate, red cross, iron helm. Their leader spoke softly, but his eyes were cold. "The church requires the names of all women residing here," he said, "for record and protection." Protection, the sisters knew, meant control. Dame Isolde, the Beguine mistress, met him with calm courtesy. "We serve God through work and prayer," she said. "Our names are known to him alone." The soldiers searched the house anyway. They took scrolls, counted looms, questioned women. You kept your head down, hands trembling on the shuttle. When one of them reached for your wrist, you hid the moon cord in your sleeve. That night, the sisters gathered in the garden. The frost gleamed under starlight. Dame Isolde's voice was quiet but firm. "They will come again. If you wish to leave, do so before dawn. The roads are dangerous, but captivity is worse." You looked around. Faces you'd come to love, lives built from courage and scraps of cloth. The air hummed with decision. "We'll scatter," Isolde said, "but the thread will hold." She pressed something into your palm, a spindle carved with a spiral like the one the woman had drawn in the ash. "Take this north," she said, "to Mord if you find her, or to whoever listens." You nodded, heart pounding. The stars above seemed closer than ever, as though leaning down to listen. By dawn, you were on the road again. The river had frozen in places, the air sharp enough to cut your breath. You followed the northern track along its edge, the spindle tucked against your chest. Each mile carried you farther from safety, but closer to something larger, something pulsing beneath the surface of this fragile world. In the villages you passed, you saw signs, a spindle carved on a doorframe, a braid of 3 colors hanging over a window. Sometimes a woman would catch your eye and nod, just once, before turning away. At night, you dreamed of threads stretching from cottage to cottage, spinning across the land like constellations, unseen, unbreakable. And in those dreams, you heard a voice, familiar, though you couldn't place it. "Spin, child of Willow Road. The world's loom waits for your hands." You'd wake with your heart racing, the frost silver in your shawl, the spindle warm against your chest. One night, you sought shelter in an abandoned chapel on the moor. Ivy had claimed its walls, and a tree grew through its roof, roots twisting through the old altar stones. As you built a small fire, you saw carvings faintly visible under moss, not crosses, but spirals and threads, women holding spindles, their faces serene. You touched the stone. It was cold, but beneath it pulsed something faint, like a heartbeat in the earth. You knelt, whispering the only prayer you knew, not to saints or priests, but to the weavers of old, to the women whose names had been burned away, but whose threads still ran through time. Wind swept through the broken door. The fire flickered, and for a moment, you thought you saw figures in smoke, 3 women spinning, their threads of silver stretching outward into the dark. One looked at you, eyes ancient and kind, and nodded. You blinked, and they were gone. But the sense of being seen, understood, remained. You stepped outside, dawn rising behind you, painting the frost pink. The road north shimmered ahead, endless and open. You tightened your shawl, the moon cord brushing your wrist, the spindle safe in your palm. The wind whispered through the grass, and you thought you heard laughter, low, fierce, unbroken. If the world is a loom, you thought, perhaps we are the pattern yet to be woven. And you walked on, toward Mord, toward the women waiting beyond the horizon, toward the next story waiting to be spun. Beautiful. You want the story to continue beyond this point. Same tone, lyrical, historical, mysterious, never-ending, following her journey north beyond the House of Thorns. Here's the next 3,000-word continuation, full of atmosphere, folklore, hidden networks, and the widening sense that she's walking into the living myth her foremothers began. The frost that morning shone like a field of glass. Each blade of grass caught the pale sunlight, trembling with brightness. The sky above was colorless, the kind of washed gray that promised more snow by dusk. You walked with your head bent against the wind, boots stiff, the spindle hidden close to your chest like a heartbeat. The road narrowed as it climbed. Here the world felt older. Stones jutted like bones in the frozen ground. The trees twisted inward, their branches black with ravens. When you passed them, they cried in rough voices, echoing across the hills as if calling your name. At midday, you found a wayside cross, half buried in drift. Someone had tied a braid of thread to its arm, red, gold, gray. You brushed the frost away and saw that same spiral carved at the center. The sisterhood has been here. That knowledge warmed you more than the weak sun could. Further along the ridge, smoke curled from a chimney, thin, uncertain. You followed it and came to a cottage built from stone so old it seemed part of the hill itself. The door hung crooked on its hinges, but light spilled through the cracks. You knocked once. A girl answered. Younger than you, maybe 14, with hair the color of straw and eyes sharp as flint. She looked you over and nodded toward the hearth. Come in, traveler. My mother says the wind eats the kind that linger. Inside, the air smelled of milk and peat. A woman sat by the fire spinning flax. She didn't look up as she spoke. You carry a spindle not your own. Your breath caught. She smiled faintly. Don't hide it. We all carry another's work. Sit. You obeyed. The girl poured you broth, thin but hot. The woman's hands never paused in their spinning. You've come from the south, she said. The Dial sent word. They say the bishop hunts your trail. Your fingers tighten around the bowl. How far behind? Far enough if you keep walking. But their reach is long. You told her the Beguine house, the soldiers, Dame Isolde's words. The woman listened, eyes half closed, as though weaving the sound into her thread. When you finished, she nodded once. Then you must cross the fell before the thaw. Beyond it lies Hollowmere, a valley where the churchmen fear the tread. They say the ground there swallows iron. The girl grinned. And voices echo twice when you speak truth. You didn't know if they were teasing, but the thought stirred a spark of courage. The woman wound her spindle, tied off the thread, and handed you a small bundle of yarn, deep green, the color of moss under snow. For the road, she said, and if you meet a woman with a raven feather in her hair, tell her Rowan sends her greetings. You left them at dawn, the sky bruised with storm. The girl waved once from the doorway, then vanished into shadow. The climb was cruel. Snow thickened. The wind carved shapes in the drifts like restless hands. But there were signs, a twist of grass tied in knots, a scrap of red cloth under stone. That kept you on the right path. By the second day, the storm hit. You took shelter beneath an overhang, wrapping your shawl tight. The spindle spiral caught a faint gleam of light, and in the roar of wind you thought you heard whispers. The same rhythm as a loom, the same murmur as the die-house song. Hold fast, child of Willow Road. The pattern grows beneath the storm. When morning came, the snow had stilled. The world was white, endless. You stumbled forward until the slope fell away beneath your feet. A valley stretched below, half-frozen lake glinting at its center. Hollowmere. Smoke rose from a cluster of huts near the shore. You made your way down. The people here lived quiet lives. Fisherfolk, mostly. Their boats pulled onto the ice like sleeping beasts. They looked at you with mild curiosity, but no suspicion. You traded a skein of yarn for food and a corner of a barn to sleep in. At night, the lake sang. It was not imagination. The ice itself groaned and hummed as it shifted. The villagers said it was the voice of the deep, remembering things too old to name. You lay awake listening, and in its song you heard echoes of spinning wheels, of looms beating time. One evening, an old man pointed toward the woods beyond the lake. If you seek the sisterhood, he said, go there, but mind the thorns. They drink blood before they let you pass. You thanked him, heart pounding. At dawn, you crossed the ice. Frost bloomed beneath each step like stars. The forest on the far shore was dark, tangled, full of the scent of resin and rot. You pushed through briars until they caught your sleeve. When you pulled free, the moon cord snagged and tore, not broken, but frayed enough that a single thread hung loose, shining pale against the gloom. You followed where it pointed. The forest ended abruptly in a clearing surrounded by yews. At its center stood a hall built from living wood. Trunks bent into arches, leaves whispering overhead though no wind blew. The air smelled of smoke and honey. A voice came from within. Enter, child of thread. You stepped inside. Dozens of women sat around a long hearth. Some wove baskets, others ground herbs. A few tended scrolls made of thin bark. At the far end sat a figure cloaked in raven feathers. Her hair was silver, her eyes dark as water. I am Runa, she said. You carry Dame Isol's spindle. You held it out, she said, to bring it north. Runa touched the spiral carved in its end. Then you bring more than wood. You bring memory. She gestured for you to sit. The church burns our books and names, but they cannot burn the pattern itself. Each spindle keeps a thread, a memory of who we were. Yours holds a line of willow and mist, of hollow mirror and gray fun. You are the newest link. You felt the world tilt, the weight of generations pressing into your hands. What do you want me to do? Runa smiled, a glint of steel behind the kindness. Spin, tell stories, teach others. When enough threads meet, the world will remember us, not as witches, but as weavers of truth. She led you to a loom unlike any you'd seen. Its frame was carved from branches still alive, roots curling into the earth. Threads stretched across it in every color. Crimson, gold, indigo, green, shimmering as though woven from light itself. This is a loom of branches, Runa said. Every sister adds a line. Each carries a piece of the old world into the new. When you touched it, the threads quivered and images rippled through them. Your mother at the hearth, Joan by the fire, Marjorie's laugh, Maud's sharp eyes, all alive within the weave. Your breath caught. Runa's hand rested on your shoulder. Do you see? We are not gone. We never were. Weeks passed within the hall. You learned to die with moss and bark, to read the marks the church forbade, to send messages hidden in embroidery. You helped carve charms that travelers left at crossroads, small tokens against fear. At night you sat by the fire with the others, listening to Runa's tales of the first weavers, women who stitched constellations, who spoke to rivers, who remembered the shape of freedom before men wrote laws against it. But peace never lasts. One dawn, a scout burst through the doors. Riders, 6, maybe more, bishops' men. The hall stirred like a flock of startled birds. Runa rose. We scatter again, she said calmly. The pattern endures only if its threads move. She turned to you. You must carry the spindle further north. Beyond the sea lies the island of Brannock, where the old songs still breathe. Find them. You wanted to test. You just found safety purpose, but her eyes allowed no argument. Before you left, she tied a new cord around your wrist. Green, red, silver. For remembrance, she said. And if ever you forget who you are, hold the spindle to the wind. You left as snow began to fall, the hall fading behind you like a dream. The land changed as you neared the sea. Harsher winds, salt in the air, gulls wheeling overhead. Villages here were poor and wary, their chapels small and crumbling. Yet in every one you found signs, a braid on a door, a spindle mark on a stone. The network stretched even here. Once, in a fishing hamlet, a child slipped you a shell carved with a spiral. Mother says to keep walking, she whispered. They're watching from the cliffs. That night you camped among dunes. The sea roared in the dark, endless and alive. When you held the spindle up, the wind caught through its carved holes and made a low, fluting sound, almost a song. You remembered Runa's words and listened. Beneath the surf's crash you heard it. Faint voices, weaving together. Spin, spin, the pattern begins. At last you reached the harbor. Ships rocked in gray water, their sails patched and stiff. You bartered your last skein of yarn for passage across the channel. The captain, a woman with scars across her hands, looked at your spindle and nodded once. I've carried worse secrets, she said. The voyage was rough. Waves rose like dark walls, wind lashing spray into your face. But through it all you felt the spindle's steady pulse against your chest, as though guiding the ship. When lightning split the sky, you saw, for a heartbeat, the outline of 3 figures on the cliffs, women cloaked in light, watching. You whispered their names, Joan, Marjorie, Maud. The storm eased by dawn. The island rose ahead. Steep cliffs, fields of heather, and beyond them, smoke from hidden hearths. They met you at the landing, women in cloaks woven from seagrass, their eyes bright as the horizon. One stepped forward. "We felt the thread tighten," she said. "You brought the southern spindle." You nodded, exhausted. "Runa sent me." "Then you're home." They led you up a narrow path carved into rock. At its summit stood another hall, smaller than Runa's but alive with sound. Looms beating, voices singing, gulls crying overhead. The air smelled of salt and dye. Here, the work continued. The women called themselves the menders. They took the broken threads of stories, those twisted by the church, and rewove them. You helped, spinning by daylight, writing by firelight. The spindle's spiral gleamed, linking all your journeys into one line of memory. At night you'd walk to the cliffs, watching the sea crash below. Sometimes you thought you saw lights moving far out on the water, lanterns, or perhaps other travelers coming by hidden routes. One evening, while the others slept, you felt drawn to the shore. The tide was low, revealing stones worn smooth as bone. Among them lay something half-buried, driftwood carved with a pattern of spirals. When you touched it, it hummed. A voice rose from the wind, low and familiar. "Moored." You turned. The mist thickened, shaping itself into her, older now, but unmistakable. Her eyes shone with pride. "You've carried the thread farther than any before," she said. "But the weaving is not done. Soon they will come with fire again, and the world will need new patterns to survive it." You reached out, but she faded, leaving only the spindle's soft glow. The tide surged, washing over your feet, cold but cleansing. You looked toward the dark horizon and knew what she meant. The work must never end, each generation spinning, weaving, remembering. When you returned to the hall, the others were already stirring. You took your place at the loom. Threads of every color crossed before you, each one a life, a story, a promise. You added your own, a line of moon-pale silk drawn from the spindle's groove. Outside, the sea roared like applause. And as the sun rose over Brannick, you felt it, the vast, unseen network stretching across lands and ages, a tapestry too wide for any church or crown to burn. The pattern shifting, alive, endless. You smiled, the thread running sure between your fingers. The world was still being woven, and somewhere, far away, another girl would wake before dawn, reach for her spindle, and listen for the hum of your thread beneath her own. Once, in a fishing hamlet, a child slipped you a shell carved with a spiral. "Mother says to keep walking," she whispered. "They're watching from the cliffs." That night you camped among dunes. The sea roared in the dark, endless and alive. When you held the spindle up, the wind caught through its carved holes and made a low, fluting sound, almost a song. You remembered Runa's words and listened. Beneath the surf's crash you heard it, faint voices, weaving together. Spin, spin, the pattern begins. At last you reached the harbor. Ships rocked in gray water, their sails patched and stiff. You bartered your last skein of yarn for passage across the channel. The captain, a woman with scars across her hands, looked at your spindle and nodded once. "I've carried worse secrets," she said. The voyage was rough. Waves rose like dark walls, wind lashing spray into your face. But through it all you felt the spindle's steady pulse against your chest, as though guiding the ship. When lightning split the sky, you saw, for a heartbeat, the outline of 3 figures on the cliffs. Women cloaked in light, watching. You whispered their names, Joan, Marjorie, Maud. The storm eased by dawn. The island rose ahead, steep cliffs, fields of heather, and beyond them, smoke from hidden hearths. They met you at the landing, women in cloaks woven from seagrass, their eyes bright as the horizon. One stepped forward. "We felt the thread tighten," she said. "You brought the southern spindle." You nodded, exhausted. "Runa sent me." "Then you're home." They led you up a narrow path carved into rock. At its summit stood another hall, smaller than Runa's but alive with sound. Looms beating, voices singing, gulls crying overhead. The air smelled of salt and dye. Here, the work continued. The women called themselves the menders. They took the broken threads of stories, those twisted by the church, and rewove them. You helped, spinning by daylight, writing by firelight. The spindle's spiral gleamed, linking all your journeys into one line of memory. At night you'd walk to the cliffs, watching the sea crash below. Sometimes you thought you saw lights moving far out on the water, lanterns, or perhaps other travelers coming by hidden routes. One evening, while the others slept, you felt drawn to the shore. The tide was low, revealing stones worn smooth as bone. Among them lay something half-buried, driftwood carved with a pattern of spirals. When you touched it, it hummed. A voice rose from the wind, low and familiar. Moored. You turned. The mist thickened, shaping itself into her, older now but unmistakable. Her eyes shone with pride. "You've carried the thread farther than any before," she said. "But the weaving is not done. Soon they will come with fire again, and the world will need new patterns to survive it." You reached out, but she faded, leaving only the spindle's soft glow. The tide surged, washing over your feet, cold but cleansing. You looked toward the dark horizon and knew what she meant. The work must never end. Each generation spinning, weaving, remembering. When you returned to the hall, the others were already stirring. You took your place at the loom. Threads of every color crossed before you. Each one a life, a story, a promise. You added your own, a line of moon-pale silk drawn from the spindle's groove. Outside, the sea roared like applause. And as the sun rose over Brannick, you felt it. The vast, unseen network stretching across lands and ages, a tapestry too wide for any church or crown to burn. The pattern shifting, alive, endless. You smiled, the thread running sure between your fingers. The world was still being woven, and somewhere, far away, another girl would wake before dawn, reach for her spindle, and listen for the hum of your thread beneath her own.